Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Trevor Grassi, and today I have a very exciting conversation with Dr. Manu Seyfzadeh, who I could probably spend a good 20 minutes listing all the reasons why I respect you so much, Manu. But I know we've got a lot of material to get through. But Manu,
Yeah,
you
we can skip the resume. It's okay.
are okay. Well, I
Mhm.
have to say that you're basically the Egyptologist that I respect more than anyone in terms of just having an encyclopedic knowledge of every um, period, especially the pre-dynastic period, which is my favorite, every diagram, map, and drawing and record of every statue, every temple. I
Mhm.
don't know how you do
Mhm.
this, but you're someone that I consult before anyone else when it comes to anything to do with Egypt, especially your focus on the hieroglyphs and the really digging into these symbols that you find. You're very dedicated to reaching the bottom of any of these really important mysteries. And today we're here to talk about what I consider to be two of the absolute most important mysteries in ancient Egypt that really focus on the pre-dynastic, for one thing, and some of these questions that have been very contentious. And you've brought forward this massive body of evidence to prove that a couple very important points, such as the Sphinx was not built by Khafra. um, this idea of a record chamber or a repository of knowledge from an earlier age was not just the suggestion of Edgar Cayce, the world-renowned psychic. It's not just myth or legend. And this is what we're going to focus on right off the bat. First of all, is the Sphinx and its true origins, and whether or not there really is an archive underneath it or was. So, this is anyone who's seen my channel before. It's something I'm very passionate about myself. So, yeah, we're going to try and get into that material today, which is so exciting to me. And all the evidence you've brought forward is so convincing to anyone who's still believing this fourth dynasty built the Sphinx myth. I think this ends the debate, basically. So we're going to bring up maybe get into that as well as another subject, which is also very connected to it, relating to the Egyptians' own account of their own origins and history, where their culture actually began in the land of Egypt, and actually listening to the Egyptians themselves and what they had to say about it, which is very much following in the tradition of a dear friend of both of ours, John Anthony West, who laid down some of this first. Um, a case for challenging the traditional model of the origins of civilization as a whole by bringing attention to the Sphinx and all the water weathering that he brought forward with Dr. Schoch and Dr. Thomas Dobecki, the work they did there in the 90s. You, yeah, this second part of, or the second interview, we might break this up into two interviews, but that has to do more with the Edfu Temple of Horus. So I want to cover both of these subjects with you today, and we'll probably split it into two videos. But for starters, we're going to get into right here. This is your book that is absolutely one of the most important books that's ever been written on Giza, especially in the last few decades. Nothing comes close to this body of evidence right here, and so we're going to start by getting into some of this material, which is it's just one of my favorite books I've ever read. It's so packed every page with evidence-based information because you have the highest standards. You're actually in this category, in my perspective, you're up there with John West and Dr. Schoch and some of the most rigorous researchers who really take the time to look up every detail. So I'm so excited to get into this with you. And I want to thank you so much for coming to talk with me today
Of course,
and
of
say
course.
welcome.
Thanks for the invitation. Mhm. I
Yeah.
just I just wanted to mention upfront real quick. So I'm not a credentialed Egyptologist, so people don't get the wrong idea, right?
Right.
I am an amateur. I am a trained medical scientist, so I have an MD and a PhD. So what I bring to the table is that I've learned how to learn things efficiently. That's the skill, and maybe that explains why I dig in deep and I try to get to the original source. I don't usually use secondary, tertiary sources. I've tried to always go to the primary source of the evidence. And you're right. In Under the Sphinx, there's a lot of footnotes. There's a lot of references, and I wanted for
Yeah.
people, and we had to do this, right? Because we're basically
Finger.
challenging. Yeah, exactly. We're challenging the mainstream model of the Sphinx, and so you can't come to the table empty-handed. You have to give the evidence, and so I try to do that as best as I can. I also want to really quickly say that I have a working knowledge of hieroglyphic. I know people sometimes I hear people say he's fluent in hieroglyphic. I don't want to claim that at all. I can take a text now, I would say, and work with it and using what other the experts in hieroglyphic analysis, right, dictionaries and grammar, with all of that combined, I can look at a text and understand it. And so I would call this a working knowledge. If you want me to classify this, I would say I'm a good intermediate level hieroglyphic reader. I can do demotic, which is extremely difficult for me personally to recognize the symbols, and I can't, and I'm not, I have a very, very limited idea of hieratic just by recognition, right? So hieratic is basically hieroglyphic, but I cannot claim at all that I can look at a hieratic text and recognize what hieroglyphs are behind that. I could work it out, but it would take me a long time, right? So I just wanted to say that as a disclaimer. And I appreciate the compliments. I mean, that's very kind of you, Trevor. But I just want to make sure that you understand this is all hard work. Nothing comes easy to me. This is all a lot of time I put into this, and when you put in the time, you get results. And so I just wanted to say that up front.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I imagine you might clarify this even, but that to me is better than being someone who can just read the higher.
Right,
It's when you find a passage that you recognize the importance of, you're gonna
right.
make sure you figure out each glyph in it and get to the
Yes.
bottom of it, which is the level of dedication that I truly respect at the core of what you're doing. It's
Hmm.
you're willing to go as deep as you need to in any specific subject, and you're not interested in the subjects that aren't important.
Right,
You're interested in the most important questions, which
right,
are how old is the Sphinx really?
right,
What really was below it? What was the purpose of it? What was
right.
it guarding?
Right.
And
And of course, this also requires for you to recite what the other side is saying, right? You have to understand, well, what is the evidence that Lehner and George Reisner and Zahir Was and all these and Selim Hassan, what is the evidence that they collected that made them say that Khafre made the Sphinx from the bottom up, right? And you have to weigh that evidence against the evidence that you think you have discovered, right? And of course, I didn't dig up the evidence, right? This is all evidence that the Egyptologists had in their backyard, but they assorted this into category, right? Sometimes they can't explain something and they just lump it in with some other evidence. And I will have a good example of that for you when we start talking about the details. And so that's what I did. I looked at this and saying, well, this doesn't quite fit into this bin, this bucket, right? Why doesn't it fit in, right? So I looked at that, and then all of a sudden you realize, well, wait a minute, this really is something other than what the Egyptologists are saying, right? And so this is a very important concept. So I did not discover any new relics or writings. Of course not. I'm not an archaeologist, but I looked at the evidence that exists, and you might say, well, why do you think that you can do that? Well, it turns out a lot of the Egyptological evidence and the interpretation is sometimes only based on what one guy said 100 years ago,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so we're just adding another set of eyes, and because it's so opinionated sometimes, and of course there's politics involved, sometimes other eyes are not allowed or they're not being respected, right? And so that's where we come in, you and I and alternative historians in general, we are basically forcing them to say, look, we are another set of eyes. We are your peers. You may not think of it as academic peers, but we are just, general people with education, people with other expertise. And when we look at the evidence that you opined about in the past, we come to a different conclusion, right?
Yeah.
And so, of course, they don't like it sometimes. They attack us. They think we're pseudoscientists, pseudo whatever, right? But this is what we're having an issue with. So, anyways, we'll get into the details and I will give you examples of what I just said.
Yeah, definitely. It reminds me again of the way that John Anthony West had come at it and in Serpent in the Sky and in the Mystery of the Sphinx in his works he did this Sherlock Holmes style reason of by deduction, eliminate, first of all, look at why they believe what they believe. And with the
Right.
Sphinx, he said there's basically three pieces of flimsy evidence they're basing this whole coffer built
Yeah.
it theory on, which was, for one thing, this statue that was discovered, I believe, by Reisner in the Valley Temple nearby of Khafra. Um, which suggested he had something to do with it, but certainly didn't say he built it. And then there's the half of his name written on the dream steel, which is cut off, which probably was his name, honestly, but probably was just referencing him as someone who carried out one of the many restoration campaigns on it or did some work there. And then, of course, the third being that it just looks like him, which John actually brought in a forensic,
Frank
analysis.
Domingo.
Frank Domingo from the New York Police Department, one of the top people in the world who could actually analyze the face as compared to that of the Khafra statue that was found in the Valley Temple. And he said, no, it's not Khafra. Pretty definitively showing the difference in the angles of the faces. And so I think, yeah, even back then, John had already shown that there's very, very flimsy evidence in his own words to say that Khafra built the Sphinx in the first place. Certainly that he had something to do with it is a fair guess, but
So now what I've done, Trevor, it's interesting. So I've looked at different statues of Khafre, and there are some depictions of him, especially, and they look like when he was a teenager or maybe in his early 20s, as opposed to the famous one in the Cairo Museum where he's shown like a young adult. Like I would say maybe he was in his 30s then. If you look at the younger pictures, you can sort of I would say it's closer to the Sphinx face. It's closer. It's not. I agree with you. It's not a perfect match by any stretch, especially from the profile. If you look from the side, that's a different facial structure. From the front, there are some sculptures where I can, sort of kind of I can see maybe, well, maybe that's Khafre. But overall, I agree with you. It's not a convincing match. But as Robert Schoch and Robert Bouval and Graham Hancock and myself and other people, we would probably just concede that point. We could say, well, fine, if you think that looks like Khafre, we don't have a problem with it because we don't think that statue was originally made by Khafre. He may have put his face on it, right? But that's not an original statue carved from the bottom up by Khafre's teams, by his workers. So we're willing to concede that point. And, if either it's Khafre or it's somebody from his family, I actually think it's a woman. I think this could be Hetep Harris. Yeah, maybe it was Khafre's great grandmother, the mother of Khufu, something like that. And because, Khufu obviously honored his mother, and so it could be that it was her face. Some people thought that there's a female face, right? So it's not a really big sticking point for us for the alternative historians, but everything you said, I agree with. It's not a very compelling case. And the broader picture, I agree also. The Khafre thesis, which is that he built the whole thing from the scratch up, is a circumstantial case. It's not a absolutely beyond all reasonable doubt. And Lehner knows this.
yeah.
He knows himself that this is the best they can do based on the evidence how they have interpreted.
Yeah, it's essentially a guess. If we're being real, it's a guess.
It's an educated guess.
Yeah,
It's
based
we
on some suggestion.
Yeah,
And I think what we'll get into today is the fact that there is a decent chance that that the face was actually recarved in his time. There's definitely some suggestions that that is the case, and I'd agree with you as well that I'm not 100% sure it couldn't have been him or one of his relatives. It could very well be something like that.
yeah.
And that statue is so amazing too in the Cairo Museum, where you see Khafre. It's one of my favorite statues in the whole land of Egypt,
Hmm.
with a Horus behind his headdress that you can only see from behind, as if his consciousness is joined
Hmm.
with that of Horus. It's amazing. But yeah, it certainly doesn't say that he built it from the ground up. So yeah, I'm so excited to get into all of this material here, and yeah, I'm gonna say if you want to start bringing up some slides to get into it, we're gonna be looking at what really is the first, because John and Schoch in the 90s, like we say, they have brought up the water weathering issue, which everyone's probably familiar with. We don't have to get into that. But it pushed the date of the Sphinx back, many thousands of years before the first dynasty even. So we're putting it back to this range of potentially what you and I and Graham and Baval and everyone are noticing, that the whole site of Giza is pinpointing in many ways using the astrology and the weathering and all these different factors towards this, like 12,000 years or more around that point, 10,500 BC. So that evidence has kind of stood on its own until you published your book Under the Sphinx. And so this material again is what we're going to get into. Graham Hancock gave a great foreword to this, but let's get into the evidence that you brought on top of all this weathering and astrological dating, which is a bit more concrete than anything we've ever had before in terms of giving researchers this kind of firepower, the artillery to bring to the conversation of, wait a second, we do have hieroglyphic references. We do have images of what looks like the Sphinx before Khafre's time, going back at least 500 years or so. So I would love to start getting into some of that evidence if you want to share some slides about that.
Yeah, yeah, I will do that. So, do you remember when you look at the Dream Stealer, right? You can visualize it, right? The Sphinx is sitting on a structure, on a building, and you have two copies of the Sphinx looking in different directions, right?
Yeah, let me pull this up. I have it right here.
Yeah, great.
There we go.
That's right. Exactly. Right. So this is a key, that's a good starting point for us. So I'm going to show you now a couple of images that date to something like 400, 500 years before the time of Khafre. And of course, the Dream Stealer, as you know, comes from Thutmose the Fourth. So that is another over 1,000 years after the time of Khafre. And I completely agree with you. Just there, first of all, and as Graham pointed this out just the other day at his conference, the mention of Khafre on the Dream Stealer is there's a fragment of what could be construed as a cartouche. And again, I concede. Let's say yes, that was the mention of Khafre, but the problem is that the sentence in front of all of that is cut off. So, and even at the time of Henry Salt, when that original transcription was produced, even then the sentence in front of that is lost. So we don't know what was said in that sentence. So there's no evidence at all that it
That,
says anything about Khafre built the Sphinx from the bottom up, right?
right, that's further down. If we went down a few more lines, you'd
Yeah,
see the one that's cut off. This is a crop
right.
version of it
It
at
says it says something which I'm just remembering vaguely. It says Khafre made in the image of Ra Atum or something. This is what it says after the cartouche, right? And but if you have to remember, this is what 1,000 years later was said about this, right? And so and the names of the Sphinx were Horachti and Horemachet, right? And so we have actually no evidence of these names in the Old Kingdom, and that's when it really matters. Like, what are the names? If there was such an amazing statue at Giza in the Old Kingdom, well, why don't we have any written reference to it? And this is what Robert Bouval asked himself in years ago, and that is the question he starts to address in Origins of the Sphinx. The famous book 2017 with Robert Schoch. That's the book they gave me in 2017. Robert gave me the book when we were on a tour together. I was joining them in a Croatia cruise, and it's a very memorable experience for me. He gave me the book, right? I read the book, and
amazing
immediately
book.
Yeah, it's an amazing book. And Robert was pursuing in hot pursuit of exactly this question. He was trying to figure out, well, what did they call the Sphinx in the Old Kingdom? And what Robert came up with is the pyramid texts do mention Horachti. It's on the south wall of the antechamber, and there is an astronomical description of events. And in that context, I think it's pyramid text 264, 655, something like that. It says Horachti. And that's, of course, one of the names of the Great Sphinx. And so that's how Robert said, okay, this must be the Sphinx in the sky, and the Sphinx on the ground is Hor Machet, right? So this is how Robert put this all together.
That
And
was
I'm reading all,
Robert Bauval, not Schoch, said that, right?
yeah, yeah, Bouval, right, exactly. And so I'm reading this book, and at the time, I'm going, okay, but this is after the Sphinx, or after Khafre, right? We're talking pyramid text, we're talking Unas, we're talking Fifth Dynasty. So I said to myself, there has to be some mention from before the time of Khafre, if they are right, if if the alternative version of events is correct. And so this is how I got involved, right? And at the time, I was actually interested in the architect of the Great Pyramid, the supposed architect, Hemiunu. And I had looked at his inscriptions from his pedestal, from from his statuary, from his reliefs, and there was this interesting entry on the next to his left foot, and and I'm looking at a lioness, okay, and I'm going, well, that's amazing, right? We have a guy who who supposedly came before the Sphinx, and there is a lioness, right? And so that's how this whole thing got started. And so I did a little bit of research into it, and then I got excited. So I told Bouval about this when I saw him at Contact in the Desert, and he said, and we didn't have much time then. He said, "Let's do this in Sedona at Robert Dakota's conference." And so this is just a couple of months later, and so I drove over there, and I saw Robert again, and Robert Schoch was there too. And I never forget this scene. I was sitting there having breakfast with them, and I had brought a little a model of a lock that I had built based on this key thing, with the bent rod that we called the jaw sign. And because Robert said to me, if you got something good, you should be able to say this in 30 seconds, right? And so I decided to not say anything and just do a demonstration of what I was saying. I said, that's a key. This is what I was trying to say. Okay. That's how all of this started, right? And so we were sitting at breakfast, and they saw me do this thing with the box, unlocking it, and they were speechless. Okay. Almost. And I didn't say anything. I let it just sink in. And that's how this whole thing started unfolding.
Yeah,
So
that turned
yeah,
into an academic paper soon after, right?
yeah, it turned, and even that paper, there were still gaps. I realized later, and I've been filling in those gaps even after that paper came out in 2017. And I want to show you one of those gaps right now to kick this off. Okay, so do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, and I will also put into the description the links to these papers, everyone we mentioned. There's a few of them that you did with
Yeah,
Schoch and Bauval,
right.
yeah, just Schoch there's
Yeah, that's right. There's one with Schoch and Bouval, and then there's a couple of papers about the Sphinx with Schoch, and then we did one on Göbekli Tepe about the symbols on Pillar 18. But
yeah.
so yes, so whenever I can share, just let me know. I'm going to share my screen with you.
Okay, yeah. This sounds good. Yeah, and at some point I'll let you get into it a bit, and then I have a couple slides I might share back to you after you show some of these that I think relate to it also that I'd love to hear your opinion on also.
Okay.
Uh,
Can you see this ceiling right now with Mehit?
yeah.
Okay. So can you see me magnifying this right now?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, good. All right. So, uh, just so for background, so what we're going to look at now is a series of imprints. So these are, imagine like a little roll seal, and these were discovered in the first dynasty monuments, like the royal tombs, for example, in Abydos, or on that amazing ridge of Nisht Mastabas in North Saqqara by Walter Emery and Petrie, of course, and then a Emile Amélineur, a French Egyptologist who was there before Petrie in Abydos. So it's basically several archaeologists that at the turn of the at the turn of the 19th century, they found various of these sealings, and they all date to the first dynasty, and they show this lioness with can you see the cursor moving?
Yeah. And by
Okay.
the way, that's the Khafre was in the fourth dynasty, so first dynasty is well before him, just to
Yeah,
clarify.
first dynasty, that's right, correct. Yeah, so that's about 500 years, 5 to 400 years. But the first dynasty were 8 kings, and that period lasted for about 200 years. And so this predates the Pyramid Age, fourth dynasty by about 3 to 500 400 years, let's say.
Yeah. I guess
So
first pyramid was they say was Djoser, which was third dynasty, right?
yeah, that's right. 2670 BC. So, yeah. So, anyways, so on this, so these sealings are what you're looking at are basically these imprints of these seals into, mud or something that you can press the seal into, and that's what you're looking at now. So here, this is the typical motif that you see. So you see the lioness. It has this strange bent rod coming out of the back. And we ended up calling this the jaw sign in that 2017 paper we just talked about. But each one of these seals has a slightly different theme, right? So in this one, I wanted to show this to you because this really gets to the heart of the main question. Well, is this a real animal or are we looking at a statue, right? And so this is the chisel sign, and the chisel sign is as old as dynastic Egypt. And the way you translate this, it stands for the sound mer, MR. And so, for example, the name Narmer, the first king of the dynastic Egypt, he has that sign in his name, right? But of course, what's being depicted is a chisel. And so, as you can see, there's two chisels hanging over the neck and the front of this lioness, right?
So
So
it's
I
saying
just
it's a
wanted
carving, right? It's that
that's
it's a
that's
statue.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, that's the way that I would interpret this, right? So this isn't this is not this is actually showing us, and in addition to the rod, of course, which there's no such animal that has this thing coming out of her back. So this is this is, and so why is it written in this picturesque way when really hieroglyphic was a phonetic language, right? And so this is an important question I want to address right now, is that in the very early, the hieroglyphs, the was a ready-made script from very inception, and it was originally found. The first records are from a tomb in southern Egypt in Abydos, in from Tomb UJ. This was discovered by Günther Dreyer and his team, the former head of the German Archaeological Institute. And so they discovered these very early records, which showed basically hieroglyphs that were phonetically encoding words. But if you look at the records of the first dynasty, there's also a small set of symbols that are not phonetic. They are used as a picture, as an icon. And the Mehit symbol is one of those examples. And the Egyptologist that described this is Wolfgang Helck. He's one of the most renowned Egyptologists. To give you an idea, so Wolfgang Helck was the second-hand man after the war when the German Archaeological Institute was being reestablished, right? Because they were shut down because of the Nazi associations, right? And so after the war, the Germans wanted to reestablish a presence in Cairo, of course. And so the very first team that was in charge, Wolfgang Helck was the second-hand person. He was basically at the office in Cairo looking at all the new discoveries and putting this all together in some amazing publications. And I got one of those publications, and that's where this information I'm telling you comes from. Okay. So what Wolfgang Helck is saying is that was a set of iconographic images, symbols that did not belong to the original phonetic set that came from Tomb UJ in South Egypt. No, that small set came from the northern part of Egypt, from the Delta. And so the way that Helck put this together, he said when the north was conquered by the south, they adopted some of these symbols. Then by the time of the fifth king of the first dynasty, those most of these symbols were phased out. So Helck noted that you don't see some of these symbols any longer after the fifth king, which is Horus Den. But this symbol survives, this lioness symbol with the bent rod. It's one of the very few symbols that makes it all the way through, even into the fourth dynasty. Okay, so I just wanted to explain why I'm reading this as images rather than phonetic signs. And so this is one thing I wanted to show you, right? Now we don't see the shrine here yet, the royal administration of the scribes in the first dynasty, but I'm going to show this to you now. So let me just find the right image. Okay, so you can see that now, right?
Yeah, just switched. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so this is what kicked off our 2017 paper. So now this is the famous one, where we see a lot of detail. So in C is Mehit, there's the bed, and then we have this shrine here. And so this is classically interpreted as the Southern Egyptian Royal Administrative Shrine. And it's in the form of an animal, as you can see, with a tail hanging off. So they have to, so this is, see, there you go. That's an icon. It's not used like a phonetic letter, so to speak, or a symbol that encodes something phonetically. We know that the name is Perwer. Perwer means the Great Hall or the Great House. That's what it stands for. But it's in the icon of an animal, and then it's sitting on top of this building, right? Which is very similar to, remember what you just showed me on the Dream Stealer, right? You have the Sphinx sitting on top of a building. So the iconography is very similar. Then when we have here, that's actually in E, we have a real hieroglyph. That stands for stau. And stau is basically means ropes, ramps or corridors. You can interpret it that way. And the name of Giza is Rostau. So this is a localizing to us. In our interpretation, this localizes this particular shrine, royal shrine to Giza. And then you have the lioness sitting in front of it, right? And then here we have a phonetic spelling of the name of the lioness. So at that time, there was not a letter, there was not a symbol that encoded the meh, MH. But so what they did is they spelled it with a symbol that encodes the opposite, which is HM, hem. And of course, this symbol is very well known in hieroglyphic. It means that symbol by itself means priest. So hem neter means the divine priest. And so here it's used as to spell out the name of Mehit, right? It says Hemhet. Hemhet is basically kind of like a dyslexic way to spell Mehit, right? And then here in B, we have the sign of the delta. So we are in the north, we're not in the south. That's a really important concept because people have said, well, Manu, Mehit is a southern lioness. Why are you associating this with Giza and the delta? Well, it's because it's showing us here that this is the delta. That's the sign for the delta. And here is the sign east. So the lioness is looking east, which is just like the Sphinx. It's in the delta. It's at Giza, and it's associated with a building-like, animal-like shrine, right? So this is the main takeaway from the 2017 paper is that we were saying we have evidence of a statue at Giza, at Rostau, okay, in the delta that's looking east, right? So we're basically closing the loop now on the features of the Great Sphinx.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and yeah, and now I'm going to show you an important transition point, and this is extremely important. This is something that a lot of people have not seen from my publications because we didn't put this in the paper because I didn't know about it yet. So I'm going to show this to you now. So I have to let me see if I can share this again with you. So let's click share, and we're going to go to this one. Okay, and now here, so you see this, right? This is a ceiling. This is actually now this is a mud seal. So first of all, can you see what I'm showing you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is in the Louvre in Paris, and this was found by a Amilier. He discovered this, and here now you can see the lioness. There's the lioness. There's the there is the bend rod. If you follow my trace here, there's the bend rod. So this is Mahit. There is the hem sign. Remember that is basically the name at
Wow.
the time, hem head. And now look, you see the lioness is now sitting on a building. You see that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is an important transition point because some people have criticized I've seen this comment. They say, well, how do you know this is not the same building? The Sphinx is sitting on this shrine or this structure in the Dream Stealer. Why are you saying that Mahit's sitting in front of this animal shrine? Why is that? Are you equating those two? Well, it's because there is a transition where we see exactly that. We see Mahit sitting on a building. Okay, but it's not a Sphinx, it's a lioness,
Uh, yeah.
right? And this is from the second dynasty, by the way. So this is now, let's say, something like 100 years. This is, I think, from the king Per Ibsen. So from his tomb, yeah, it's from Per Ibsen, right? And so that's now where you see the transition between the Mahit sitting in front of the shrine to Mahit sitting on top of the shrine. And then the next step after that is what you showed me on the Dream Stealer, where you see a Sphinx sitting on the shrine. Okay.
Okay. Could I jump in quick?
Of course.
With something that I didn't really prepare this into the few slides I had, but I just found it on the internet quick, and I'm not sure if you've also put this together, but let me share my screen and just open the browser. There are Sumerian stones, like this one that's called the Kaduru stone, and these are boundary stones that the Sumerians were using. I don't know,
Right.
have you seen this image before?
I have seen this before. Yes.
Yeah, you have like right here again, you have an animal like this with one of these structures.
Right.
This is just one I pulled up quick, but I found several of these boundary stones there.
That's right.
And likely as well, astrological symbolism. That's probably Scorpio there. And here you have one of the heads of the weird serpopards, they're called.
Yep.
Um, a very weird, interesting animal that's mysterious. Nobody really knows what these are, but you see them on the Narmer palette, on some Egyptian, uh, and also some Sumerian cylinder seals. So, yeah, do you see a connection between the Sumerians and these boundary stones that were
Yeah.
marking out the different
Right.
lands?
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a great. I'm glad you pointed this out. So there are, first of all, of course, one way to interpret this is that they're astrological figures that they saw in the sky, right? And these blocks are basically what they considered the houses of the zodiac, right? That's one way you could think of it. But be that as it may, there are Egyptologists that have proposed in the past that the Sumerians at some point in the past had influence on Egyptian culture and architecture and iconography. There is it's difficult to ignore this because when you look at some of these very early dynastic images, iconography, and then you look at the contemporary Sumerian iconography, like what you just did, basically, right? It's difficult to say no, that has nothing to do with each other. So. I know there's Egyptologists, for example, like Stan Hendricks, unfortunately he passed away recently, but I had a good working relation with Stan Hendricks, and Stan Hendricks was one of those, was one of these experts on Egyptian iconography, and he thought that the Egyptians themselves developed these icons like the niched mastaba, the niching of the mastabas, for example. He thought that comes from pre-dynastic Egypt. And so he would probably argue against this idea, but then there's other Egyptologists that have argued for it. So it's even the Egyptologists amongst themselves have debated this. But the take-home lesson is you just showed me a lioness sitting on a block, right?
Yeah.
And that is what we're looking at here. We're looking at a lioness that's first guarding it by sitting in front of it, and then we have a lioness that's sitting on it, and then 1,000 years later we have a sphinx that's sitting on it, right? So, and that's what Stan Hendricks described. He said, as time went on, you had very simplistic icons that got stylized, right? But stylization means they become more sophisticated, more abstract, right? But so he recognized that even the ancient Egyptians, as far back as pre-dynastic times and early dynastic times, they started to stylize these original icons. And so that's why you see this change over time. Like first you see it in front of the building, on the building, and then all of a sudden we end up with the Sphinx. So I think this is something that that tells us that there was a statue there before Khafre, and Khafre usurped, like Rob Nayland likes to say, usurped the statue, stole the identity, if I may say so, and just put his face on it, but he was using an iconography that was much older. It was a lioness that was guarding a royal administrative building that was involved with scribing and archiving of the very early royal records, right? And that lioness was guarding this archive. And the people that had the key to this archive were the top guys, the vizier, like in this case, Hemiunu, who was Khufu's vizier, Wepemnofret, or Nefres Shemra in the third dynasty, or Hessi Ra in the third dynasty, right? And so there was like a few people that we have records from that carried this title, the Mehi title. And so we know this was an exclusive title. This is not like anybody was not able to walk into this library or this archive, right? This was very, very exclusive. Only the king. And of course now I want to show you the Wepem Nofret stela, which is beautiful. It's stunning. And I know you've
Yeah.
seen it, but I want to show it to your audience. So let me share that one as the next
Yeah.
one.
Well, I'd also say there's one passage maybe I can stick in here quick after also that came from it was either Sumerian or Babylonian, but where it seems like they're directly referencing the Sphinx, and talking about this lion statue where you have to approach it from behind and then go down. It sounds like it's talking about the door by the Sphinx's tail, to me, at least.
That's right. That's it. That's interesting. Well, okay. You know what, Trevor? Now that you said that, I'm going to show you something else before we go to Weapon
Okay,
Warfare. That's fascinating that you just said that. I didn't know that actually. So let me
I'll
let me
find that
show
quote.
this. Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you just mentioned that. Okay, let me show you something else then. That one is that one is let's see. Where was that again? Um I have so many pictures. Now I'm now looking at my ARE talk, and I know I have this in the ARE talk. I just have to
Now that was
quickly
an
find.
amazing talk. We were there together last year. That was the first time we got to meet in person. So amazing.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and
this was the okay. So now let me. So I just queued this up, and now let me go back to the talk, and now I'm going to share. Uh, so I'm going to click this off and then reshare, and now here it is. Okay. Yeah, sorry about the tech here. Okay, so here it is. Look at this one, Trevor. Look at that.
mhm.
That's what you just said. That's a chamber, by the way. This is how the ancient Egyptians in the first dynasty did not do perspective drawing. That's an important piece that you need to know. When they wanted to illustrate a chamber or a building, it was just a two-dimensional upright structure. So there it is, and that's a ramp, and it's in the back of Mahit, exactly what you just said, and it's under this shrine.
Yeah, wow, cool.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we could definitely go deep into just talking about that specific tunnel, but we're told that it doesn't go down far and it ends, and we know Hawass and Lehner excavated that one. And yeah, I do have one reference actually telling us that Hawass himself said before 1998 when he suddenly started with his whole "there's nothing under the Sphinx" story. Before that, when clearly I think he was told to stop talking about it at 1998, because before he was going into the tunnels and saying, even Indiana Jones won't go here, that video. And
Mm,
but yeah, my friend Elena Denon in her book, The Cedars, she actually talks about him inviting her to go down into that tunnel before that point. It was earlier 1998, I think. And she said that he told her at that point that it led to this long hall underneath. So that was Hawass himself actually saying that before a year later. And
mm,
we know about that tunnel. You could get in there for 10 grand or $15,000. You could pay them to get a private. You could go down into that hole, but you'll sign an NDA. You can't tell anyone or take pictures. So
mm.
we could go
Interesting.
deep into that tunnel on its own, but yeah, we do. I do think that it did lead to this larger hall that was underneath, which Elena describes in her book in more detail as well. But yeah,
Yeah,
we're
but I
getting
mean, look,
some really good stuff
it's a,
here.
but it's so amazing, right, that we're talking about this, and then we're looking at First Dynasty records that basically iconizes all of these concepts, right? We have a guardian, we have a royal archive, we have a chamber, and then so it's all there, and And it's just never anybody never looked at this. It's just it's
Yeah.
evidence sitting on the table. And of course I know why, because if you come at this from the paradigm that there was no statue before Khafre, then of course you're not going to look at this evidence
Yeah.
in that
That's
light,
so so important to mention that I was going to say even earlier when you were talking about this, that the issue is like, it's fine to make an educated guess, but don't state it as truth. State
Yeah,
it as it is an educated guess because
that's right.
you get these ideas about the timeline entrenched into your academies and universities to the point where it becomes, such a rule that the academics are not considering the possibility like you are with an open mind saying, well, what if there are images of this statue
Yeah,
before Khafre? They're not even
that's right.
looking for it. It's
No, they're not.
all like you.
That's right. This
Yeah.
has to do with their methodology, right? So archaeologists use context arguments and they're informed by prior evidence and prior ideas. So this introduces a bias, right? This is how, and of course I understand they can't do experiments at will. Like, I'm come from molecular biology. So of course, if I had a question and if I could design the experiment, I could do the experiment, but they can't do that. So they substitute that with what we call soft science arguments, right? Soft science arguments are not actually falsification arguments. You just basically pick a model and then you contextually make an argument for it. But then you start confusing it with the truth, like which is what you just said, right? You start thinking, oh my God, that's the most likely, the most plausible
Yeah.
model based on the evidence. And so we are going to just call that the truth. And then if somebody comes along and says, wait a minute, this contradicts that, then you're going to get flack from them because, right? Because they're opinionated after all.
Yeah, so you call it the Pythagorean theorem long enough, nobody's going to be looking for that triangle in ancient
Yeah,
Egypt, which is
yeah,
where Pythagoras obviously got it from.
that's exactly right. Yeah.
Things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So here is now Wepem Nofret. So Wepem Nofret, this is an image, by the way, from Berkeley. So Berkeley houses this particular, it's an amazing stela. This was discovered by George Reisner in the early 1900s. And at the time he was being funded by Phoebe, what was her last name? Can't remember right now. Famous person. And so she funded his expedition, right, in Giza, the early phase. And so he got to take this back to California, and this ended up in Phoebe Hearst. It ended up in the Phoebe Hearst Museum, and they don't display this. So this is actually an image of something that's in the archives. This was a slab stela from the Westfield. This was an early official probably at the transition between Sneferu and Khufu, and his name is Wepem Nofret. So Wepem Nofret, that's his name right here. And look here on the right column, this is what the Egyptologists call the academic title series. So there you have the chief, the Medjay, the chief of the royal scribes, and then here's the chief of what I call Babu Mehit, and we can get into this in a moment why I translate it this way. Then here's the Hemneter, the priest of Sechat. So see, Sechat is an archiving goddess. She's the patron god. She was the patron goddess of archives, libraries, and she was the
Author of
fourth.
Oath too, right? That's pretty high title.
Yeah, yeah. And then she's the foremost in the house of in the house of royal knowledge. Okay, that's what this means. So there you go. You have Mehit within the context of scribing and archiving and a library. So this
That's
is an important.
that's a stylus with inkwell up there, right at the top.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So, and then here is the name, and then here, if there's any doubt, there's the name of the lioness. There it says Mehit, and now see there is the Meh symbol that came after the first. It wasn't invented yet at the first dynasty time, and then later, I believe it was the third dynasty, is when this first appeared, and it comes in the context of the name of the lioness. This is Heka. So Heka is Egypt, it's
Magic.
basically it's the skill to invocate with language, phonetically invocate with Egyptian words. And so Mehid was associated with this skill, with the Heka, and Repem Nofret was a Heka master, obviously, because that's what this means. And so in addition to that, he was also the guy who held the key to which is what we're saying, the key to the archive. And he was the Seshat priest of the royal. So you have all the entire context. I'm making a context argument now, like the Egyptologist. I'm saying, look, This is a guy who was before Khafre, and he was associated with a lioness that was associated with archives and associated with scribes, okay, just like in the first dynasty. And so what we're saying is that's not an animal, that is the shape of the guardian of this library, which was a lioness.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's it's similar. The invocation, like Heka meaning magic, a lot of people translate it just as magic, but if you look at the word abracadabra, that's the same thing. It means as I speak, the reality follows what I say, becomes what I say. Very
That's right.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so,
it's not the same as conjuring, right? It has a negative conjugate connotation in times later, but in the true hacker meaning is actually very closely associated with logos, which is the method of creation in Abrahamic religions, right? Like it says it in the Quran, it says it in the Old Testament, the way that things become things is by utterance,
yeah.
right? There's a concept, and just Plato in Timaeus, there's a long, and we're going to get to that the next hour, right? In Timaeus, he describes how the demiurge, the creator, reasons out an original and then makes it happen as a copy of this original in the cosmos that we know, that we can perceive, right? And that is exactly the same process. It's just like the Memphite creation myth, where you have Ptah conceptualizing an idea, and then Ptah utters those ideas into actual existence, which is the cause and the names of the cause, right? And then the potter spirits, the Kanums, they shape this into material existence. So, anyways, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a warm up for the next hour at Edfu.
Yeah. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, maybe we could go a little bit further into that title, which you describe it as a dual title because it's saying two things.
Yeah,
Master of the royal scribes and master of
oh,
the
Babu
keys,
Mehit, right?
Umahi,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
know. I owe you an explanation for that. I know.
yeah,
So,
could you tell a little bit about the key signal and how
yeah,
you named
yeah,
it, what it's named, and how you came to that? I mean,
yeah.
yeah, you kind of described already a little bit.
Right. So let me see if I can show you the image. Okay, this is exhibit A, really. And among the many, but this is an important exhibit. So this is something Petrie discovered in Abydos, in the tomb of Jer. And this is what I wanted to explain. Remember when we were talking about lumping? This is a classical example of this, because the Egyptologists lumped this wooden plate into the category of oil tags. On these oil tags, these were basically shipping labels, right? They were attached to precious goods that were meant for the royal graves. And on those tags, it says something about the quality of the oil, right? And the quality of the oil, if it was top quality, then it was designated with the front half of a lion. Okay. And the back half of the line was basically the inferior quality, and then there was maybe a middle quality, which was in the shape of a donkey leg. I know this sounds funny, but it has to do with how you phonetically what the phonetic meaning of that symbol is. So be that as it may, in this particular example, you see both the front and the back of a line attached to each other, right? So this is obviously not a word. It's not spelling out the quality of oil. And in addition to that, you have this structure, this building. Remember, I said that buildings in First Dynasty depictions are not perspectively drawn. So you have an upright square, but what this stands for is a structure. It's an enclosure made of square blocks, as you can see here. And then there's three baboons or apes. Petrie calls this, he called this actually prisoners, but but clearly these are not humans. These are, look at the ears, look at the facial structure. So these are sitting baboons or apes, and there isn't. I'll explain why. But the more important issue is you have a lion or a lioness the size of a building, right? And you're looking at it from the side angle, and so this is how many lions the size of a building do you know in ancient Egypt, right? We don't know any except for one, which is the Sphinx. And let me see if I can advance this. Yeah, well, no, this is another image. Yeah, this is what I want to show you. So this is from Göbekli. This is a picture I took a couple of years ago when I was on Göbekli. So there's the Muslim cemetery. There's the famous Sycamore Grove here, and there you see the Khafre Valley Temple. Behind it is the Sphinx Temple, and there's the Sphinx. There's the Great Pyramid, and there are the Queen Pyramids. Right? This view, that is exactly the same view as as this view, right? So I just wanted to show you this is a first dynasty carving from into a wooden plate, and it shows what an ancient visitor to Giza standing up on Gebel which is the most amazing place to look at Giza from,
Yeah.
would have seen. Okay, in my opinion, right? They would have seen a statue with the temple in front of it, and then these three baboons. Now, what is the meaning of these three baboons? And I have to explain this because people will ask you otherwise, Trevor.
Yeah.
So it turns out when Uvo Hölscher excavated the frontal portal of the Khafre Valley Temple, which is, more than 100 years ago, he discovered a giant statue of a black granite baboon. Okay. Now, there's very few people that know this because very few
I did.
people, yeah, because very few people read, German literature, unless they're Egyptologists, and even the Egyptologists, most of them don't know about this. Okay,
Yeah,
but
I
it's
actually thought Marriott excavated that one. What did he?
he
Yeah.
excavate that's you're right. He excavated the interior of the Khafre Valley Temple. But it's a good point, yes. But Uwe Hölscher excavated the front, the portal. Like when you walk into the temple, that whole area was under sand, even, long after Mariette came to the temple. So when Hölscher excavated the facade, the front of the Khafre Valley Temple, he found this ape just lying there in shadows, and there was two niches, and you can still see those. There's two big niches in front of one in each portal into the Khafre Valley Temple. That's where these apes used to sit. Okay.
Or
And
back.
this is published. Yeah, and they're huge. Well, we're talking I think over 5 feet or something. It's a huge statue of an ape, a black ape, black granite. Okay, so that's the context. So the somehow, just like, for example, you see apes in various Egyptian temples. That's basically a symbol greeting the sun. But of course, ultimately, the baboon is a sign of Thoth, Thoth, the moon god in ancient Egypt, right? When you had the full moon, it was symbolized as a baboon. So Thoth full
Yeah.
moon was symbolized as a baboon, and the baboons, they were squeaking and howling at the rising sun, right? They do this naturally, and so the ancient Egyptians, to them, the baboon was a sacred animal, and that's why they put this statue in front of, and it may well have been Khafre who put that statue up there. I don't have a dispute with that. But I just wanted to establish a context between this building, the Sphinx Temple, and baboons, which were sitting in front of the Khafre Valley Temple, right? So that's how we're reading
Well,
this.
yeah, that's also I remember that I mean the Thoth is associated with the ibis, obviously, but the baboon is a secondary symbol related to
Right.
some people say it's even the baboon more represents Jehuti, which is kind of an earlier form of the name Thoth or related to it. But
The
I've heard
ibis.
before
The
that
ibis. Yeah.
yeah, that like the ibis might be more closely associated to the name Thoth and the baboon closer to Jehuti, which I heard actually John West speak about one time in a interview he did where he said possibly the ibis and Thoth was more of the side of wisdom that comes from reading books, written records, studying manuscripts and things, whereas the baboon's wisdom was more an internalized, like what rises from your own well springs of your own consciousness when you're in meditation. Because actually, baboons were seen sitting on the banks of the Nile at times, just gazing off like they were in meditation. And he thought maybe this was a part of the reasons that symbol was chosen to represent internal wisdom, whereas the ibis might have been somehow related, speaking more to like what you learn from reading books and something, which are
Yeah. Yeah.
both important, obviously. But I thought that was
Right.
interesting. Yeah.
So I just have one comment about that, just to as an addition. The name of the baboon aspect is Babi, and that's mentioned in the pyramid text. When you walk in immediately to your left, before you even enter the chamber, he's mentioned. So the name of the baboon aspect of the moon is Babi.
Do you think that's related to where the word baboon came from later?
I don't know, maybe.
Possibly. Well, I think
Yeah,
there's so many of those, like Thoth, for instance, or thought or Toth, different pronunciations. I think it's the root of the word thought because it's really it's speaking to this concept of consciousness within a human being, or like, an enlightened human being, an incarnate version of consciousness, which it's thought.
yeah, yeah.
Thought. Well,
It's interesting. It's interesting you say that. Even if that were not to be the case, conceptually, that is exactly right, because Thoth was thought to be the heart of Ra. And the heart is where the thinking, the conceptualizing, the rationalizing, that was the rational aspect of Ra. So you're absolutely right. I completely agree with you. Even if etymologically that were not to be the case, but conceptually, I think that is the case. Yes.
yeah, cool. Well, we know there's a lot of that, like the word netter. Muhammad Ibrahim,
Nature.
he told me like, yeah, that's actually pronounced more like nature than netter,
Yes.
which is
Correct.
literally the word nature. The netter
Correct.
are the forces of nature. There's so
Correct.
many of those things. Or like they say, Sakara may be the root of the word sacred, or
Hmm.
Luxor may be the root of the word luxury, some people have
Hmm.
said. I don't know,
Hmm.
possibly all of them.
Hmm.
But I think
Right.
a lot of Western words come from Egyptian. Anyway,
Yeah.
let you continue here.
Yeah, well, I wanted to show you. You were asking about the jaw sign, right? So, I'm going to so I don't have to scramble looking for the right images. I'm just going to describe it, and then I can always give you the images later. But anyway, so I after the 2017 paper, right? One of the questions that I asked myself is, how can we provide additional evidence that the jaw sign actually means what I thought it meant in 2017. In other words, a key. So that means those special individuals, the viziers, they were what that was meant to say is that they were in possession of the key to the royal archive of Mehit, right? That's how we interpreted it. But I wanted to see if I can have more evidence to actually nail this down. And so I want to acknowledge, first of all, an Egyptologist who mailed this to me some couple of years later. His name is Avery Wilson. I believe he's an Egyptologist in Canada. And I know of Avery because he posts at Graham Hancock's forum sometimes. And, we had a couple of exchanges there at times. So Avery, a few years ago, mailed me a reference to an excavation in Nazlet Batran, which you probably know. Nazlet Batran is south of Nazlet El Saman, and in Nazlet Batran, uh, Edouard Naville discovered a first dynasty mastaba dated to Jet, Horus Jet being the son of Jer, right? So you have Narmer, you have Horus Aha, and then you have Jer, and then you have Jet, and then after that comes Den. So dated to the first dynasty. In that mastaba, there were some pottery shards and different items, and on one inscription was found, and on that inscription, it's written in symbols that were clearly part of that delta group of signs. So they're not hieroglyphs, or not all of them anyways. And so it's difficult to read that text, right? But believe it or not, there's the jaw sign. Okay. It's one of the rare instances of the jaw sign being used in any other writing other than Mehit, over Mehit, right? And of course I was excited, right? So I'm going, well, what does it say? And it's written with another sign next to it, which is the city sign, the location. Like, in other words, the jaw sign was in the context of a determinative sign that refers to a place, a city, a town, a location, right? Like that. So that was one piece of evidence. So it confirmed something that I had suspected before Avery sent this to me, that the Babu sign refers to a location. And why did I think that? Because Petrie found some pottery shards where you see the again, you see the jaw sign, which is the other rare instance of it being used in some other writing. And then next to that was the symbol for granite or for oil. Okay. And so now I was able to put this together, right? So I figured, okay, the way this was used, the jaw sign in that context, is to designate the name of a location where precious oil was being made to be shipped to the royal graves. Okay. And so what place was that? Well, Bubastis. Okay. In the Delta, there was a city that is known to be the origin of precious oil manufacturing in ancient Egypt and probably pre-dynastic Egypt as well. And so that was the key. So now I realized that that sign, the phonetic value of that sign, somehow had something to do with the ancient name of Bubastis. Bubastis is Greek, but what was the ancient Egyptian name? Well, it was Baset. Baset is even mentioned in the very first set of hieroglyphs that Günther Dreyer found in UJ. And this is actually one of the very first instances where he realized, oh my God, we're dealing with a phonetic script, because here we have a ba bird and we have the sign for the throne. And so obviously that must be ba set. Another place, another way to say set place means is bu. So it can be ba set or ba bu, right? And now here, finally, I can finish the arc of what I was trying to say. In the Sumerian dictionary, in the Assyrian dictionary of Sumerian words, there is actually a word that says babu, and guess what it means? You're not going to believe this, Trevor. You're not going to believe this. I'm going to ask you, what do you think? What do, and I didn't know what to expect, right? This is one of those things when you do in science, you do a prediction, you have a model, you need more evidence, right? And so you're saying, if I think this model is correct, then it predicts that there should be other evidence that corroborates this model, right? And this is the prediction I made. I had no idea what to expect. So I'm sifting through the Sumerian. And why am I going to the Sumerian dictionary? I'll tell you, because there is evidence that there was a connection between the Delta, prehistoric, the Butu-Madi people in the Delta, and the Sumerians. The Butu-Madi people, you can think of it like an economic hub. It was like a trading post where,
Pre-dynastic culture in Egypt.
yeah, exactly right. Where basically the ancient Egyptians from the south and Middle Egyptian, they were trading goods through this hub with the Sumerians, with the Levant. And so that's where that connection comes from. So guess what? So give me just a rough guess. What do you think Babu means in Sumerian? What do you think?
Well, now that you're
The
asking
jaw
that,
sign.
I'm thinking, well, I want to say that it might have something to do with the baboon potentially, but I know that also that Ba is the Egyptian, basically the word soul, as opposed to Ka is similar, meaning like
Okay. But
spirit
but
or
but
spirit.
remember, it's
Maybe.
we're trying. But try. Remember, I was trying to explain the jaw sign, right? The bent rod. So
Yeah.
at this point, I'm saying, okay, that bent rod stands for Babu. It's basically a sign that the Delta people use to refer to their city Baset, Babu Bastis, right? And but I am saying that this is a key. Over Mehit, it refers to a key. Okay, and you just showed me.
So does it
You
mean
just
key? Is that it?
It means opener, Trevor.
Opener of the way.
This is bizarre.
Okay.
It means
Um,
opener, right? The
Yeah, okay,
Sumerian,
let's put this image back up really quick because
yeah,
we keep talking about this, and the jaw sign you're talking about is this bent rod coming up out of the
right,
back and all these
yeah,
things. Here's a triple one. So
right.
we didn't really cover in the basics of it is that this was in these different royal titles you picked up from Hemiuno and the rest, and you describe in your book and stuff that there were only five individuals in all of Egyptian history that got this title, right?
Yeah,
Um,
maybe six. So after
Five or six.
Mary, yeah, after Mary, there is one more individual where it may have been an honorific title. So he may not have so it's just basically given to him as as a token gift. And then there's one more reference in the later Fifth Dynasty where it's actually associated with two temples, if you can believe this. So there's the Mehit title in association with the two houses. So, but anyways, yes, there's very few people, seven people in total.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting what you're saying now because I wasn't aware of the Sumerian version of that word meaning the same thing as key. But I just
Yeah,
want to clarify that it was you who dug into this because this was the one symbol in that title that nobody did know what it meant, and you had
right,
to do this process of experimentation and
right,
looking into the fact that there were
right,
actually keys that were shaped this way in Egypt and
right.
that's likely what it meant. And so you were the one who ended up saying, okay, well, this one seems to be a symbol that does mean a key, and we're the first one to basically define that hieroglyph because no one else knew what it meant.
That's right.
Um,
Now, no,
and also, how did you name it, Jaw? I want to say also is very,
yeah. Yeah,
very,
we did right in his. So before I found out the Babu link, right, that what I just told you, we basically we looked at the shape of keys in ancient Egypt, and so we proposed it. But I mean, it wasn't quite solid yet, right? I wasn't happy completely because there were still other ways to explain it. And but this was the key, right? Because the key, literally, that was the key. Because this whole thing started making sense. And by the way, I presented this to Bob Breyer. I sent him an email with this. I'm saying, look, Dr. Breyer, we may have Bob Breyer being an Egyptologist who's interested in mummification, and he's well known. And I said to Dr. Breyer, look, you know about this set of symbols that came from the north that Helk thought were not part of the original phonetic hieroglyphs, right? And here we may have a way to resurrect that ancient language of the Butumadi, which is lost, of course, right? The Butumadi were conquered and they became Egyptians and they started using regular hieroglyphs, right? But so here was a model, a template, basically. And I said to him, "What do you think about this?" And he was really interested. He's saying, "Well, you know what? You need to talk to a Sumerologist." And so it never ended up happening. But um, another thing I need to say is that I've seen commentary on social media when they look at this jaw sign that they say, well, that's the Nile, okay? The loop being basically the area of Luxor where the Nile takes a turn to the east, right? And they're saying, why didn't you think about this? You thought you're calling this a key, but this is just the Nile, right? So they're basically showing the Nile on top of Mahit. Okay, well, my answer to them is fine. I'm not just doing visual recognition here, right? I took this to the next step. I'm actually giving you more evidence that this is not denial, okay? I'm giving you evidence that that symbol refers to an opener in the Sumerian dictionary, and the Sumerians and the Butumadi obviously had some exchange. And in addition to that, the Sumerians were using in the very early phase of their language pictures. They were spelling words using icons, right? And the Butumadi, by the way, the Wolfgang Helck, the way he reconstructs this Butumadi script is exactly the same. He's saying that they were using images, put them in two syllables, put them together. So this is a completely different type of language script than the hieroglyphs, right? Where you have a consonant basically represented by a symbol. Here we had syllables, and it was a picture language. It was not a phonetic language, okay? And so this whole thing, all of this extra evidence argues against this being denial, against this being anything other than what I'm saying it is, which is a key. So I raise the stakes now on this argument
yeah.
with the jaw sign.
I mean, if you say, what's the title mean when it means Master of the Nile of Mahit? That doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so to me, this is a really nice, well-fitting story. It all fits together and it challenges, in my opinion, it compellingly challenges the Khafre Sphinx model. Now, I cannot take this, obviously, with written evidence, I can't take this all the way back to 10,000 BC, like geologically, like Robert Schoch did, or astronomically, like Robert Bouval did. I can't do that, but I can do what scientists do. I can falsify with new evidence the Khafre model. And remember, that's a circumstantial evidence model. It's not, they don't actually have an inscription that says that Khafre made the Sphinx. They don't have anything like that. It's a circumstantial evidence model. And and that evidence does not weigh as heavily, in my opinion, as direct written evidence that proves that there was a reference to a statue, a lioness statue, guarding a royal shrine at Giza, looking due east, okay, with which is not an animal because we have chisels over her head. We have a opener symbol above her back, and it's associated with a guardian. That's a master of the scribes, master of archives. Look at this whole story I'm putting together. Like that's what you said in the beginning. There's massive. I agree with you. I think this is heavy. This is not. I'm just not pointing to
Well,
one piece.
it's
It's
certainly leagues and bounds beyond any of the
yeah,
three
yeah.
random points they brought up to say it was Khafre. And if you
That's right.
prove that it's Khafre, it doesn't matter if it's by 500 years or 10,000. You've
That's right.
disproven that it's Khafre, and you're saying
Exactly.
we need to stop saying this is Khafre
Yeah.
at the
And
very.
then of course, after I did all of this, then Rob Nayland came, and Rob Nayland is a he's a world champion in snow sculpting, right? And Rob, it's geniusly, when he was trying to sculpt the Sphinx, he discovered that there should be a ridge on the back that accounts for the neck. And then guess what? He looks at overhead pictures of the Sphinx, and indeed there is a triangular hump in the back of the head of the Sphinx, right? Many people don't know this, but when you look at aerial photography of the Sphinx, you see that triangular, elevated, slightly elevated platform. And Rob is reconstructing this as the original neck of the lioness statue. And in addition to that, Rob proved that the entire head of this, that's why the head is smaller, right? The nemes, the beard even, this whole entire head of the Great Sphinx would have fit into the head of the lioness, Mehit. It would not have fit into a jackal, first of all, and the jackal, anyways, would have been unstable sculpturally speaking. This is what Rob is saying. So I know that Robert Temple, I actually looked at Robert Temple's book. He did an excellent job. His evidential trail is excellent. I don't want to knock him at all. He's a scholar, in my opinion. He did a
I
good
think he's
job.
great, but I definitely disagree
Yeah.
with this.
But he didn't, you know what I'm saying? I think this is a weighing problem. Like his evidence is, I'm not saying it's weak. He has some evidence, but I think the Mehit, this whole shebang of Mehit evidence, pro Linus evidence outweighs the Robert Temple collected evidence and Olivia Temple, the couple. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing is it falsifies, in my opinion, the Khafre Sphinx model.
Yeah,
In my opinion, it's falsified. And like just like you said, falsification does not mean I can date the statue. It just means that it's not originally made by Khafre. It was made before Khafre. That's all I can say based on the written evidence. And I can take that evidence all the way back to the beginning of the first dynasty, even maybe slightly before then. So we're talking something like 500 years. Okay.
yeah.
Uh, by the way, that's a red herring when Egyptologists or they want to argue, well, if it's not Khafre, then you're saying it was made by aliens or it was made 12,000 years ago, and that doesn't make any sense. So therefore, we should default back to the Khafre model. No, this is an immature argument. Okay, that's not a scientific argument. In science, you falsify a model. That does not mean you have to you have to show another model. No, all we're saying is it's not that, right? Because scientists chip away at models. We chip away, just like a sculptor, we
Yeah.
chip away the debris, and what crystallizes out from that is the truth, right? So all I can say is it was before Khafre. How much before Khafre? I don't know. Okay. But we have geological evidence, obviously, that says the ditch was cut 12,000 years ago, right? Seismic refraction data by Robert Schoch. He comfortably can date the ditch being cut back to that time period, right? But anyways, I just wanted to, and I'm not saying that the Egyptologists don't have evidence for Khafre having made the Sphinx, but I'm saying is that entire list of evidence is a circumstantial case. And a circumstantial case is not as strong as a direct falsification, which means you have written evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, at the very best, it's some circumstantial evidence to make a suggestion. It's definitely not proof. That's different.
No, absolutely not. No.
Yeah.
Now, there's another criticism that came our way, right? They're saying, well, you're saying that this was a lioness. There wasn't enough room to carve a lioness into that top layer of the Mokatam formation, right? I've seen this evidence, right? And of course, Lehner in his thesis, he argued that way. He's saying he proposed that the head of the Sphinx was made from a block of the first member, the upper member, that was just basically a little bit bigger than the head of the Sphinx. He's saying that's all they had to work with. And then Robert Schneiker came along years later, just a couple of years ago, and he's saying they had only a limited amount of substrate at their disposal that was undamaged by this fissuring problem that he's reconstructing as vents. I think it's CO2 vents that, in other words, he was saying those fissures are millions of years old and they damaged the rock. And so the sculptors only had a limited substrate. It's a modification of Lehner's argument, right? And my answer to them is, and I'm talking about Robert Schneiker, I'm talking about Mark Lehner, I'm talking about David Miano, who's echoed this argument. I'm saying to all of them, you don't know what was there before.
Right.
You are speculating that there was a limited substrate available, but you don't know that. You don't know what's been chipped away. Okay. And we have evidence, written evidence that says otherwise, that says no, there was enough substrate rock to be able to carve a lioness into it. Okay.
Mhm.
And now then people came. I mean, I can argue all day long, Trevor. I have thought about this whole thing and I think I have thought about this more than 99% of the people that think about this problem, right?
I think so
I
too.
I
Yeah.
spent months and years thinking about all the ins and outs of this argument. I have an answer for every single challenge to what I'm saying. Okay. I've seen, for example, I have people saying, well, look at GCF1, which is what you call the second Sphinx. Okay. And when you look at GCF1, the upper member, you can see the thickness of it, and the thickness of that is not enough to carve a lioness head, jackal head, whatever, or let alone a lion with a mane into the rock. So, and even that is false. And I'll tell you why, because there is such a thing called a syncline. And Robert Schoch explained this to me, right? When you go to the southern side of the Giza Plateau, the Mokatam layers have already compressed. Okay, so at the Sphinx, the individual layers of the Mokatam limestone are more expanded, and you can see, and all you have to do is look at the other layers. Look at layer 2, and you can see that on the other side. I'm talking about GCF1. I'm talking about the Mastaba of Kenkawes. I'm talking about those quarry islands. And so when you actually look at the thickness of the middle member, they are thinner than what they are in the enclosure or in the Sphinx. So you know that all those layers compressed. So that's why they're thinner, right? So you cannot extrapolate from
Yeah.
GCF1 back to the Sphinx and saying, oh, there wasn't enough rock to make a lioness head. No. And my final comment, I know I'm talking a lot. I just want to, I haven't had a chance to actually let all of this come out
That's
so
the
that people,
point here. Get it out, Manu.
yeah,
It'd be
yeah. So
amazing.
I just right. So I just wanted to also point out that that there was enough rock to make a lioness head is actually not that doesn't require that much more rock than the head of the Sphinx. But the key is the neck. And Robert Leyland found the evidence for the original neck, like I said, on the back, right? And he published this Mehit Stump, it's called. And so I think all of this evidence put together, the sculptural evidence, the written evidence, right? And then of course there's even more evidence from the pyramid text, which we don't have time to get into today. But I mean, all of this, in the sum of all of this, I think it's a significant challenge to the Caffrey model. Uh, so I just wanted to say that after Robert Schoch and Thomas de Becky and Robert Bouval, they did the legwork, they had the initial suspicion. But I wanted to say that the Egyptologists, they always ask, what about the Egyptological story? Why don't you pay attention to what we're saying, right? And I took this to heart when Mark Lehner said, we want to have a say in this. I said, okay, fine. Let me look at your evidence. Let's look at what you have unearthed, the archaeological evidence. And when I look at what they have unearthed, I can tell you, even based on your own evidence, you Egyptologists, that model does not make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, none of it, I mean, comes anywhere near the volume of references you have. And we're just looking at a few of them. If people read Under the Sphinx, they're going to see just like hundreds, I'd almost say, of the same symbol, seeing it over and over. Yes, there's no way you can deny someone is talking about this lioness statue at Giza, facing east, guarding a repository of knowledge. Um, Oh, that's one thing we definitely would love to want to mention is the hymn to Shu. Maybe we can show that at some point. I want to. Yeah, I'm ready to spend as much time today as you want to get into all this. But we can, we don't want to make these videos so long people won't watch them, but there is so
Yeah.
much more.
There's so much more. Well, I mean, I'll just hit those highlights real quick. Yes, there's a New Kingdom text that talks about basically an archive made by Thoth, guarded by Ra Horachti, right? So even the Egyptians, so it's not, we don't have to cite Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce tapped into this knowledge somehow, but the ancient Egyptians told us about such an archive, right? Then in the pyramid text, there is reference to a cave. That cave is intimately associated with resurrection, with Osiris, right? And so in my reconstruction, we're not talking about a hall or a library with shelves. No, that's I know that's what people may be thinking, but when we look at the actual Egyptian text, what they're saying, it's more consistent with a cave, a natural cave, may have been under the Sphinx, or may still be, and in that cave, there was a box with some kind of records. This is the basic conclusion from my book Under the Sphinx. And I have written evidence to show that they're referring to this archive, even in the first dynasty. There's an oil tag that says opening of the place of the archive. And there the archive is a symbol that looks like a little box, basically. And that box appears in the coffin text as a mythical place where the creation words are stored. That box appears in the Old Kingdom funerary writings, so it's a real world item associated with Sneferu's son, Neterpiapeth. And so there on his title sequence, you see that he was basically the royal guardian of this box, of this archive, right? So that's another angle to the story. Yeah, I know we don't have enough time to get into all of this stuff, and I know your time is limited, but there's so much information, and we're just touching a few highlights here.
Oh, my time's not limited. I'll go as long as you want. But
Yeah.
I will just show this one quick is the
Yes.
this is the E.A. Wallace Budge translation of a hymn to Shu, and what you explained. This was a screenshot from one of your films. Well, I'll just read it quick. A will hath been done into writing by the Lord of Kemenu, Thoth, the scribe of the library of Ra Harmachis, in the hall of the divine house or temple of Anu, Heliopolis, established, perfected, and made permanent in hieroglyphs under the feet of Ra Harmachis, and he shall transmit it to the son of his son forever and ever. And then you go on to explain that Harmachis is literally the Greek version of the name Horamakhet, or Horakti, whichever one of the two it was, which is basically the name of the Sphinx. So this passage is literally an ancient, we're talking 1300 to 1100 BC, actual reference to a library written by the hands of Thoth that is established underneath in hieroglyphs under the feet of the Sphinx.
Yep.
Period.
Yep.
No
Right. So,
other way you can
right.
take this.
Right, because that's it's great. I'm glad you pointed this out, Trevor, because people they're coming at it saying, "Oh, you're citing Edgar Cayce, it's a psychic, right? So this is like woohoo, whatever." And I'm saying, no, this is coming from the ancient Egyptians. They're talking about this.
Yes.
And Edgar Cayce, like I said, he was a healer and he was a psychic, and I am completely open to the idea that people have these abilities. I'm not at all criticizing it. I'm saying, yes, that's possible, but I'm not basing my argument on Get Casey. I'm basing my argument on what the ancient Egyptians are telling us. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
We
and in fact, based on Edgar Cayce, and probably and it may have been based on a painting by the guy who translated that text that you just showed. And I'm going to share that image with you so you can see the whole where that idea of the right forepaw of the Sphinx may have come from. Okay.
okay.
So
Yeah, I
this
definitely want to get into this. Yeah.
yeah, this is an interesting painting. So this painting the painter here is a French painter. He was one of the colleagues of François Chabas. François Chabas is the one who went to Egypt, and he got a papyrus where that is written on what you just said. Okay, and so he's the one who translated this. Uh, and then the painter colleague painted Chabas trying to basically divine what the Great Sphinx is thinking, right? So it's caricaturized here. So you see how they kind of make fun of the Sphinx. But look, the Sphinx is shown here with the writing, a written roll under the right forepaw. You see that?
Yeah.
And so this is how I think this rumor got created that the archive is under the right forepaw of the Sphinx. And that's why the people that read the Casey readings maybe may have misinterpreted where this archive supposedly is, right? And so, of course, this led to the Stanford Research Institute doing remote sensing, and then Hawass and and his teams, funded by the ARE equipment, by the way, they ended up drilling into the right forepaw various sessions, right? So I think there's something like 32 drillings into the Sphinx ditch. And the focus was basically on the right forepaw. And I think the reason is based on this painting, which may have been somehow incorporated into the case readings, and then other people interpreted that. And so, of course, this was a red herring, right? Because if you look at the physical study, the geophysical data, the anomaly A that Schoch discovered with Göbekli is actually under the left forepaw, right? Uh, and I know there's a way that you can interpret the case readings to be the left forepaw, and I think that's where the problem is, right? I think he was misinterpreted maybe, or maybe he made a mistake when he divined this information, whichever way it was. But the data clearly say, yes, there is something there, but it's under the left forepaw. And that ties in with what you're saying too, because you are saying that there is a connection between Bill Brown's horse stable or property and to the north east of the Sphinx, that there's some kind of connection. And of course, we have geophysical data that show a void in front of the Sphinx temple on the northern half. Okay. And then we have this anomaly A. So all of this is telling us that the whole corridor system is in the northern half of the Sphinx.
Yes. Yes. I'm smiling all big at this because there's new stuff I haven't even shown you yet. Well, actually I've shown you some of the secret stuff that
Yeah.
I hasn't seen, but I have something to say about this that I really want to hear your opinion of. Yeah, I have an idea about this. Very interesting. I'm not sure if you've heard of this. The There's a story that came from this young Russian child. He was I forget his name. It's a long name, but I can add it in text. Um, he was considered like a savant. He was like very very advanced. I don't know. He was like practically going to college when he should be in kindergarten, kind of guy. But he made these claims that were very. Some of the rest of what he said was very related to these. He's saying he remembers these wars on Mars and all these interplanetary civilizations and things. And but what he said about the Sphinx was that basically because you're talking about the Casey readings themselves do say straight up like it's that access to the chamber was by way of the right paw is what Casey said, which could mean a few things. And we do know that the chamber that Schoch, West, and Göbekli found under the Sphinx was beneath the tip of the left front paw, one of them at least. And so that's the one we think that Casey's really talking about when he's saying this was the entrance chamber that would lead to the Hall of Records that he described, or the Pyramid of Records. So here's what I think. This kid from Russia, he was a very young child and he came out and he said, I remember being back in this time, and there's this hole that's under the right ear of the Sphinx that a lot of people think, oh, this was an entrance of some sort. It looks too small to be an entrance to me, but um, basically what he was saying was that there was something to do with that hole under there, where what I believe, and looking to these Rosicrucian documents and some other, you know, um, mystery school texts and things like that, um, there's a suggestion that there might be my hypothesis at least is that you would have to go up onto the right paw and then crawl up to the ear there and then put the key in to unlock something that was underneath the right ear.
Hmm.
And then you could go down and like these schools are saying, basically it was a stone that was right in front of the Sphinx's chest, or potentially they just mean the dream steel possibly. And we know there is actually, I've got a picture right here actually that shows. this is just one of the random ones that shows the original excavation there, that's made from one of the earlier ones, where you could see that there is actually another stone here, which are no longer there beside the
That
dream stele.
that's Ramses the second. That's a stela by Ramses the second.
The other one, you mean?
Yeah,
Right, because the dream stele is Tutmosis the fourth.
yeah, right.
It could have been. It was kind of like a tiny little temple here, built between the arms of the
That's
Sphinx.
that's right, exactly.
And they were saying, Harvey Spencer Lewis, at least, there's some of these mystery school sources were saying they had records saying that, the procession of initiates would approach this point, and then they would start chanting here, and basically a stone would lift up out of the ground to their acoustic,
Hmm.
the chants that they would give. And they would use these specific harmonic tones that would actually make the stone rise. And then they would step down into there and walk into the tunnel, and they would stop the chant, and the stone would like sink back into place and then seal
Hmm.
the tunnel. And they would
Hmm.
go in silence through the tunnels to the Great Pyramids, for
Hmm.
initiations. So, my hypothesis here is maybe you had to climb up onto the right paw, climb up the shoulder, and stick the key in first, open it with the key of some sort, and then the door would be able to open after that.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Possibly something like that.
Hmm.
Um, so that's part of my thought about there's other things that could potentially, there's also this entrance right behind the right paw,
Hmm.
which is very interesting. It's been covered up. It's totally sealed off today, but I think this was actually one of the ones that we know there's like six or seven different entrances. There's one right behind the dream steel. There's one right behind the right paw. There's one on the opposite side of the body, one in the tail, like we know. There's one on the back that just kind of goes down into the fissure, they say, and one in the
Right.
top of the head.
Yeah.
So,
That's the most promising one because that's the one Mariette originally described, the Great Fissure. And Robert and I published a paper about the major fissure. So
yeah,
we related that to the early symbols of the front and the back of the lion, right? So remember from these are actually hieroglyphs, right? You see the front of the line, the back of the line, and we thought that this is kind of a strange way to depict a majestic animal. And so what we realized though is that this may be a reflection of how the ancient Egyptians viewed the damaged statue of a lion, okay, with a crack through the waist. And
yeah,
so that was to them that was like a divine sign, and so they incorporated that into the symbology, right? But so Mariette just went into that crack and he actually uses the word chambre, which means chamber, right? So he's the one who went all the way down and he saw something that reminded him of a chamber. The next surveyor was Leyland, and Leyland let himself down. I think he roped down and he saw squared walls. So there was some work done on the inside of the Great Fissure. And then he just saw some debris on the bottom, and it was just a small opening, so he didn't pursue it any further. And of course, there's no record, as far as I know, of anybody ever pursuing the rest of the what is actually at the bottom of that fissure, inside of the Sphinx, right? Uh,
yeah,
that's I think where the money. No, I agree with other observers. I agree in fact with Mr. Beast and Isaiah was. It's kind of a red herring, right? They keep going to the back of the Sphinx saying, okay, there's all these rumors about, and look, it's a dead end street. I agree with them. That is probably not has nothing to do with anything under the Sphinx. That's a later addition. The only interesting thing about that bifurcation, that tunnel in the back that you enter from the back, is actually the upper, and nobody talks about that ever. Everybody talks about the one that goes down because the upper one shows something very interesting, Trevor. It shows what the Sphinx body looks like under the repair blocks.
yeah,
And when you look at that, you see it's already decayed. The second member of the Mokatam formation, you can already see it's weathered and how the blocks, and these are supposedly Old Kingdom blocks. I know there's some dispute. Lehner revised his interpretation later and said Hawass thought they were Old Kingdom blocks. And then Lehner later said, no, maybe they're New Kingdom blocks, right? So, you know, but whatever it is, you can see the damage to the Sphinx under those blocks. So, anyways, that's the shaft in the back. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is the most promising one that we have is the major fissure. That's the one, and that we have the least amount of information about the major fissure at the bottom of it.
Yeah, right. I've got a photo that I could stick in, but yeah, there are these, 6 or 7 entrances we know of, and the fact is, not one of them have we seen an actual video going to the end of it and proving that it doesn't continue. So
That's
that
right.
is one of the craziest things about this whole thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, we'll believe you, Haas. We'll believe you, Laner. Just
of
show us
course.
the video. How hard would that be?
Right,
Show us.
right.
But it's like we say with the tail one specifically, they want to make 10,000 bucks every time bring a
Yeah,
VIP in and give these secret tours. But any of them, it's like, come on, don't tell us to
right.
stop talking about this if you can't
No,
take 2 seconds to
right.
shine a light and a video camera down there. Come on,
Right.
show us the hole in the head. What's in there? If it's a tiny chamber,
Yeah.
like you say,
Yeah.
the
It's
harm.
it's it's bizarre, right? They're so coy about this whole area. And then they come and they tell us, well, we drilled 32 times and we found nothing. Okay. And the bizarre thing is, why didn't you drill where the remote sensing tells you should be drilling, right?
Yeah.
That's what you do in medicine, right? When we go after a lesion in any of the organs, we don't just insert something blindly into a person. We look at images first, CAT scan, fluoroscopy, whatever, to guide us where we should be going, right? And that it's just logical, right? So what did those
Yeah.
guys do? They drill random holes, almost random holes at bad angles, too shallow angles, all these places, except for where the money is. Where's the money? Look at the geophysical data, right?
I
So, and not
yeah.
I mean, this is the conclusion from Under the Sphinx. That whole book is basically a giant a experimental proposal. What I'm saying is, I am willing to accept defeat in terms of my model if we do this experiment. We drill a probe into anomaly A, and for once and for all, we put this to a test because if there's an anomaly, if there is a void there, that's the best chance we have at finding new evidence that that statue is older than everybody's saying it is. Okay, that's why I'm saying we should be doing this experiment rather than drilling in all the wrong places. Okay,
Yeah.
and 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 so, but I understand that drilling is a risk to the monument. Therefore, I was hoping to get another non-invasive study that confirms or not confirms the void. So I'm waiting for Filippo Biondi to show me tomograms around the Sphinx, in the Sphinx ditch, that will show or will not show something that's consistent with a void at anomaly A. This is what I'm waiting for. And I know he's got the data. I know he's going to show this eventually, right? And so
Yeah.
we are going to have an answer. We are going to have an answer
Yeah.
sooner than later.
Yes, absolutely. Brings to mind so many things. What you're saying right here is so on point. There was, maybe you saw the one in their press conference. They showed one tomographic line coming straight from the copper pyramid over to the Sphinx. And they literally showed the line of where that image was taken, just as a red line on the ground shown in the satellite image. And then
I
they
remember.
showed the tomograph above it, and the tomograph cuts itself short, like 3/4 of the way shorter than the red line. But you're seeing the lineup, and it's like, oh my God, they have
Yeah.
an image that goes straight through the body of the Sphinx and what's directly under it.
Yep.
They're holding
Of
that
course
back.
they do.
And we
Well,
know
of course they
why,
are.
because
Of
that is
course they are.
dangerous.
Yeah.
Dangerous territory now. We know
Well,
that.
I think they will release it eventually because they want,
Oh
of course
yeah.
they want to say, okay, look, we did it, right? I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure that they will release it, but each and we're not pressuring them if they eventually. I think they will eventually release it.
Well, it will come. And in my interview with them, they said, Filippo said straight up, like, yeah, our projects are going to have to converge at some point with what you've been doing with Bill talking to me. Uh,
Mhm.
my work with Bill and William Brown and Richard Gabriel. Yeah, we have so much evidence. We have GPR scans. We have GPR scans showing the entrances into these things they've got. But not to sidetrack into that realm too much, but yeah, I agree that we're about to see what's under the Sphinx, whether they want us to or not. And our
Yeah.
friends in Italy are going to help that happen. Um,
Right.
but you're hitting on a lot of important things right here. And yeah, I mean, obviously, it's at least grounds to drill another hole. And I think the holes that they did drill, and especially the diagram where you can see that on Lehner's aerial diagram, you can see, and you showed exactly where the chamber is and
Mm,
how exact inches off that, that was calculated.
hmm.
They knew
I
what was
think
down
so.
there. They knew
Yeah.
exactly where it was. Those were
Hmm.
calculated misses. They
Hmm.
intentionally did that. And
Right.
I think that's pretty obvious to anyone who's really looking at it like you and I are. And yeah, I think it's evidence to say there is a conspiracy to make sure this doesn't get figured out. And your evidence is absolutely grounds to do another drill. The only place where I don't think it was as calculated, it was somewhat more random, was way in front of the Sphinx temple, where they drilled in 1980. And as we both know, they came down and hit red granite.
Yes. Oh, that's right. Yeah,
Absolute.
that's right. 16 meters. Yeah, that's right. And then there are holes in the Sphinx Temple right next to in other words, the what is it called? The western extreme of the Sphinx Temple, still on the lower, of course, now we're on the lower terrace, right? Not the terrace where the Sphinx stitches. We're about 2 meters lower than that. But there's these little alcoves, right? That where the Sphinx Temple cuts into the bedrock. And the northern alcove, I'm going to call it, has two holes, okay, that are exactly positioned where you would where the eastern extent of anomaly A would fall. And so you already have the holes there. All you have to do, I don't know how deep they are. And interestingly, when I was there last time, they had plugged them up. Okay. But all you have to do is put a sounding like a gravitometry instrument or something that tests what's west of that to see if there's a void. And I'm sure with not today's technology. So you already have the holes. All you have to do is put something in there, put an instrument in there, and probe if there's anything to the west of that. It's so easy,
Yeah.
I'm saying, right?
Absolutely. And those holes, I say, is additional evidence that they did know something was under there. And it's just like Bill and I believe there's a tunnel
Yeah,
going straight under the Sphinx temple, from the Sphinx over to his stable property. And
yeah,
or originating within the Sphinx temple and going to both or something like that. We know of a
yes.
stone that Bill talks about. It takes 4 men to move this stone. And it's a plug stone. And then you can go into the tunnel and then they can move it back. We have a lot of stuff on that.
How deep,
But
Trevor, how deep what is the deepest that your GPR that Bill's GPR scans go?
he's done a few different ones in a few different styles or techniques, but I don't know. Most of those are I not sure exactly, but I think like 25, 30 meters might be the top. That might be
Okay.
too deep. Maybe it's less
Mhm.
than that, but
Okay.
yeah, we do have some from outside the wall, some from inside the wall, and some stuff like
Hmm.
that. And uh,
Hmm.
we could definitely go down that road for another couple hours if we want to. But I'm
Hmm.
thinking we should pull into a couple last things that I definitely want to hit on from the whole under the Sphinx material. And actually, maybe I can show you some of my slides really quick that I want to see what you think about these. Um, Basically going back to the symbol of the Hall of Records, that's what I call this right here. This symbol you see underneath the Sphinx on the dream steel. I call it the symbol of the Hall of Records for my own personal, because I think it is referring to this thing, which maybe we can talk a little bit more about how this is likely a portable box or something like you say. But for starters, I just want to show you some of the images I have of this. This was a Facebook post I did that shows a couple of them at once. But there you see it on the Dream Steel. And this is the temple right next to the Great Pyramid of Seshem Nefer. And
Hmm.
you see the symbol huge on the wall here. If me standing
Hmm.
next to it, it's big. And then there's another one of that. This is right next to the Great Pyramid. Here's a closer up. And there's this tunnel underneath it. Um, and then yeah, I've got like a video I could show of crawling down into here. There's another chamber down there, and I think there's a hollow in the floor as well where I could stomp behind this big box down there. Uh,
The Egyptologists call this the pala palace facade. And as you can see, it's niched. So this is, of course, it's a well-known Egypt architectural theme in Egyptian architecture. And remember what you showed me about that Sumerian boundary stone, right? You see, you have the lion sitting on a block that has this sort of niched pattern. And so see, this is that obviously some Egyptologists that made that connection, they thought, well, this is a Sumerian theme, and the Egyptians imported it, right? And so here now we see it in the funerary iconography, we see it with the Sphinx, right? And I completely agree with you that and Maspero did too, by the way. Maspero, who came after Mariette, right? He saw that Sphinx sitting on this shrine, on this structure, palace, whatever you want to call it. And he thought to himself, well, wait, we have the Sphinx and we have the Sphinx ditch. Maybe there is something under the Sphinx ditch that is that building. So Maspero was exactly into the same thing. And he turned this into just like Armando and Corrado, they turned this into a big media spectacle, so to speak. And Maspero did the same thing. He wanted to get funds to come to Egypt to excavate the Sphinx, and he started advertising this idea, right? So to have money coming into Egypt to excavate the Sphinx, because it was still under sand at the time. It took another 50 years before Emile Barres came and actually brought out all the sand, right, as you know. And and even Maspero gave up on the project because it was just too much of a project to get all. But anyways, I this is the we should listen to the Egyptians. Like, what is it that they're telling us, right?
it
Uh,
doesn't mean nothing,
no,
and it's all
right?
around the Sphinx too. I found one.
Yes,
It was in it's what's called just south of the Sphinx, the Tomb of the Engineers, they call it.
yes,
I saw it in there. This is another one that my friend Vicky found in one of the mastabas that was right next to the Seshem Nefer temple,
yeah,
right next to the Great Pyramid.
right,
It's in like one where the gate's usually locked, but she found it open. And I told her before, I'm like, if you see a gate open, go in. And she was like, I did it. I listened to you. And she
right.
got this image. Then there's this one. This was a really crude kind of version I found at a underground in a tomb at Tanis, actually. Uh,
Yeah,
which is in it's in Cairo, in the greater Cairo area, but it's very far from the plateau. Here's a beautiful one that's at the gem right now.
yeah,
Look at that one, man.
right.
You can always tell these little like bow tie looking ribbon things
Yeah,
are
yeah,
very, very telling.
yeah.
And then
That's right.
this one right here, this maybe you know about this is they found the sarcophagus in the Menkaure pyramid, the box,
Correct.
just like the rest that
Yeah,
then the British took it. It was being transported to the British Museum and it was
right.
lost in a shipwreck. They pulled it
Uh,
out of the pyramid.
right.
This was a clue to the Hall of Records, I believe, that was
Mhm.
right there in the Menkaure pyramid, the third.
That was Howard Weiss.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, which
Hmm.
would have been early 1800s, mid
Yeah,
1800s.
yeah, 1837, right. That's when they investigated the pyramids and they found that sarcophagus. They found a bull skeleton inside. They found a wooden cover, but that wooden cover came much later. So the writing on that wooden plate that was on top of that sarcophagus comes later. But anyways, yes, so that all of this is definite, and I like what you presented earlier because there's a Sumerian connection with all of this.
I
Absolutely.
think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe they both got inspired by the same original iconography. Of course, that's possible. We're not necessarily saying it went from Sumer to Egypt or vice versa. It could have been a common theme that they both of those cultures inherited. Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, and a lot of the yeah, I mean, Tutmosis the Four putting it on the Dream Steel, that was a very late reference back to because all these others were a lot older.
yeah,
Then
yeah.
there is just a couple more I'll show too. This was a newer one. I just saw this post, but this really great colors in these photos
Right,
of the new excavations at Saqqara. They found it again right here,
right.
which is a really great image of it. It's
Beautiful.
at Saqqara in a few places. This is my friend Hani's pictures of the same one. Um, but as we get to Saqqara, I want to maybe touch on at least one of the other last like two things I say we can hit in the under the Sphinx material here at least. Um, you have, of course, what we've been talking about is the Unas pyramid here, and here you can see a little bit of it. This is the deepest chamber of the Unas pyramid. Here's another shot of it. You can see on the walls these facades. On the sides, you can see even better that it has the same pattern as a motif around all the walls. Here's a good shot where you can see it. It's the same symbol with all these different patterns in each one of these. And this is, of course, one of the most genius, brilliant encryption methods right here is that there's all these patterns confusing your
Mhm.
eye in normal light. But
Right.
when you take the flashlight and you actually put it like right up against the wall and shine it across, you get these images like this, where you see this hidden image of the king come forward. This isn't the best shot of it, but here's on the other wall, you can see when you shine that light straight across the surface, these other pictures emerge out of it. Absolutely genius. God, I love this stuff. This is what I live for right here.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that's right. This is this is probably Khufu, based on. Do you see that in front of his head? Do you see the Serech banner? You see
this,
that? Yeah.
yeah.
So that, yeah, it's not the only possible. There is some other possibilities. There could be a fifth dynasty king, but most likely, just based on the way that Quailchick is placed in the middle, um, if you look at all the possibilities, Khufu is still the most likely explanation that is Khufu in Una's pyramid, right? How did that happen? So the way that they are explaining it is that that alabaster wall was taken from another place. In this case, from the father of Unas, who was Djedkare Sesi. Because in Djedkare Sesi's burial chamber, the facing, the wall facings are missing. So, but then how did it get to Isesi, right? So did he rip this off of some place on at Giza from one of Khufu's monuments? Who knows, right? But yes, so this is a king that's in the process of spearing usually that's the hippopotamus killing scene. That's like the famous motif in ancient Egypt. It's the king basically showing that he can kill chaos, the symbol of chaos, which is the hippos. They were considered to be dangerous animals, right? Completely out of control, going after people, killing people, right? And so this is the king showing that he's able to control the dangers to humanity.
Wow, cool.
Yeah. I have a you need to see this, Trevor, because we're talking about Palace facade. So I'm gonna real quick share this real quick with you.
Okay.
Um yeah,
I had just
real quick.
one more image to show this, but maybe this is where you're heading with it too. The chamber right before you get to that one, which I know you spent so much time looking into these, and Robert Bauval as well. This is where you were talking in the beginning about the Unas pyramid texts, which again are fifth dynasty, so dynasty after
Right,
Khufu and Khafra, but
right,
have all these codes linking back to that. So
right. But so I just wanted to show this. Can you see this here? That's a Sumerian seal.
let me stop mine. Okay, you can share.
So this is some website. I just opened it. I found it. I did a Google search.
I
By the
don't see it right now. I think you got
Yeah.
to like share again.
Okay. Let me try to share this real quick again. Let's see. Stop share and then share again. Uh, I'm just underlining something that you said before when you showed me those boxes. So here, this is. Do you see this now?
Yes.
Okay, you see that there's the crossed lotus
Uh,
flowers,
yeah.
right? And and amazingly, this is Sumerian. This is not Egyptian, but
Yeah,
it is very similar to what you just all the examples you just showed me.
definitely. Wow, I've
Yeah.
not seen that one. Cool.
Yeah, yeah. Now, and then one more thing is look at the cover of my book. So this is okay. I want to present the evidence from both sides, right? So there are people that are saying that the Sumerians influenced Egyptian iconography early on in the early dynastic phase. Okay, there's people that believe that that's a cultural transfer from Sumer to Egypt. But then there's also Egyptologists that believe no, that comes from the Egyptians themselves. Okay, so now if you hold up the cover of my book, if I may request it, under the Sphinx. Okay, on the cover, you see that boat? You see the boat,
Yeah, right here.
right? So yeah, and the boat, you see how the boat has these two boxes that the goddess is standing on?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and those boxes have also this niched pattern. So Stan Hendricks, to his credit, I'm going to cite him because he is the one who is, I believe, the first one to propose this. And this is a this image is 30, this is 5,600 years old. This comes from pottery, amazing. It's called decorated ware. It's from Nakata 2. And Nakata 2 dates to something like 3,500 BC. And Stan Hendricks believes that the palace facade, that motif originates not from Sumer, but it originates from pre-dynastic Egypt. And he's using the boat iconography as evidence for that, right? So I just wanted to present both sides of the argument.
Um,
And I want to also credit someone on Graham Hancock's forum. His name is Lee Anderson. He goes by Thanos 5051. He's extensively collected all this evidence for a Sumerian influence in early Egypt. And he may not be the first one to think about it, but he's done a good job compiling all this evidence. And he's, created threads on Graham's forum, Mysteries forum. So I just wanted to credit him because he's done a good job to pull all this evidence together. And, I've learned some of it from what I'm saying to you from him. I've looked at the original Egyptologists that proposed these different pieces of evidence. And so I just wanted to make sure that I cite all of the different people in this argument.
yeah, that sounds interesting. I think there's definitely a lot to say that there are so many equivalents between, what the Egyptians just called not the netters, but the actual gods, as in individuals who were ruling Egypt in the first time, Zep Tepi, that came before the Shemsu Hor, who wrote
Right.
afterwards, the companions of Horus, and then eventually led to the pharaohs and the dynasties.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. I think that's the very same as the Anunnaki. I think it's this elongated skull, like the Sumerians and Babylonians and Assyrians are all talking about calling the Anunnaki, and then their offspring or human god hybrids called the Nephilim is the same thing as the Shemsu Hor, basically. To me, it's almost identical. Maybe we can get into that a little bit in part two here when we get into
Hmm.
Edfu and talk about who these people were.
Yeah.
Uh,
If part two is going to take as long as part one, we're going to be here at dinner time.
Okay, by
So
me. We're running up on about 2 hours for part one now.
yeah.
So
So
that's
let's switch to
okay. Up
let's switch to
up
Edfu.
to 2 hours is okay for me for one episode. I don't want
Yeah.
to go over two, but I want to ask you one last question about this subject, and then
Hmm.
ask you to just wrap up your final thoughts on some of the stuff about Under the Sphinx. But people, just go out and buy this book right now. I swear, there's nothing that comes close to this level of actual hard evidence to really answer this question. It has been just such a stupid controversy for so long because no one has had anything concrete to base their arguments on. This is really, I mean, John and Schoch did. They had this geological evidence, but it was standing on its own. It was complemented by the astrological dating and things like that. And it was complemented by the discovery of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey and all this other evidence that's been flooding the scene with all this other contextual evidence from around the world that in fact 12,000 even back to earlier there was many signs of an extremely advanced level of civilization and sophistication of knowledge to do with the stars specifically to do with some of the earliest sites in Egypt and this very advanced math and geometry and things that we see encoded into the Giza plateau and things like that. And actually, this last point just want to ask you to touch on is related to that as well. It has to do with what started you on the under the Sphinx material as well. Um, there was a box that had a painting on the top that was you interpreted as a understanding of a implying an understanding of the heliocentric theory, basically. It looks like you've got a sun with all these planetary orbits around it, which does
Right,
not fit into the time period, or they were not supposed to have known that. We
right,
hear about heliocentricity maybe going back to Alexandria at least. Some people in
right.
Alexandria were talking about it, but that was later. Um, and yeah, there's a couple things about that. I'll just throw out a couple points and have you react to it all how you like. But um, was heliocentricity represented on this box right here? Could that also be related to some of Plato's descriptions of Atlantis with these concentric islands, concentric rings of land and water and canals? We actually know that that's somewhat related, at least to,
Mhm.
the city itself was meaning to represent the this heliocentric theory. I think you had this, I mean, literally a solar temple in the middle, or if you get into these parallels to that same city, like Atocentin is what the Hermetic texts call it, the city of the sun. And if you look to the later Rosicrucians and Hermeticists in Europe in the Renaissance, they're all getting back into this from Giordano Bruno and Tommaso
Mhm.
Campanella. They're talking about the city of the sun, Civitas Solis. These different books were coming out, and it was
Mhm.
all kind of relating back, and it was all kind of relating back to Plato as well, speaking about the philosopher's city and this
Mhm.
just rulership that should be in charge in this enlightened opus magnum, this final, creating a globally peaceful world governed by just rulers. So I think all these things are maybe connected, but maybe the layout of the city, I think to me, it clearly represents a heliocentric model. And I think what you found on this box was also suggesting that as well. So maybe you could just mention what do you think of those connections? Is that potentially what we're looking at?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that because it occurred to me that the Plato's description of Atlantis could be a symbol, a talisman, so to speak, of the heliocentric solar system. It's a fascinating idea. Um, about the book that you just showed, I wanted to just say that the book has been criticized by some people as being too difficult, too much hieroglyphs, and stuff like that. And I just want to say that my target audience is the people that are skeptical of the alternative model. And it's not necessarily, I'm not preaching to the choir, right? I'm preaching to people that are not part of the choir, people that wanted additional evidence to support what Robert Schoch and John Anthony West and Thomas Dubecki started 35 years ago, right? Anyway, I just wanted to say that. So the book is not an easy read. It's difficult, but it is I think, well supported by literature, well supported by endnotes. And
Yeah.
so to your comments, yes, I agree with that. I think that Plato's symbology may well have encoded something that was suspected at the time, but it's fascinating that the ancient Egyptians may have thought about this. And in a lot of the hieroglyphic evidence, actually, I had to research this and put it into the book because by just looking at the painting, it does not necessarily mean that we're looking at the heliocentric solar system, right? Obviously, it's a tall claim. But that's why I went through the detailed analysis, and that includes Heka, by the way. It includes invocations, invocative language. It turns out that painting there's only one example of it, and it is the example that you cite. It was on a Middle Kingdom sarcophagus and the owner of that tomb, that burial is Zeppi. Interestingly, right? From all names, it's Zeppi, General Zeppi. He was buried in front of Hotep's tomb in Barsha, and I went there. It's a fascinating place. It's not open to the public. I had to purchase a special license to crawl up there to the mountain with an entourage of something like 10 police officers, agents, tourist police, right? They were escorting me up to the mountain so I can see the burial of General Zeppi in front of the tomb of Hotep. and it was just an amazing place to go. These are rock cut tombs, and so Zeppi is the only one. And what's fascinating about the tomb owners in this mountain cemetery is that there was, higher level, but they weren't royals. They were rich privates basically, and they were
Where is
all
like what region of Egypt?
Barsha is just above Amarna,
Okay.
right? So and then just the
I was
next
gonna
it's
wonder if it was near Amarna because they got a lot of
yeah,
cliff
it
tombs.
is, right. So it's close to Samalut, the Egyptian city of Samalut. There's some beautiful places there. I strongly recommend if you go to Egypt for the second and not the first time, but let's say you're a repeat visitor, I would look at that area. Anyways, but so the fascinating thing about this is that this is close to the city of Thoth, Hermopolis, Khemenu in the Egyptian language. And so in that city, there was a library called the House of Life, okay, which is, of course, well known after the Fifth Dynasty to be an archive. And the scribes in that archive were doing spell chemistry. They were creating new spells out of the pyramid texts, and the coffin texts, for example. And and in these sarcophagi from those special individuals in around Hermopolis, you see a high incidence of this special utterance chemistry, splicing. It's bizarre. Like it's bizarre. I mean that in a good way. I don't mean in a bad way. I mean it in a creative way. They were coming up with interesting spells, and in this particular instance, in addition to this spell chemistry, they added this painting. And when I saw that painting, that's when I knew there's a book here, right? The pre-story to that is that I went to Spain to visit Robert Bouval and Jean Paul, and one night we went out for dinner, and Robert asked me, "So are you going to write a book?" And at the time, I didn't really feel it yet, right? And just it's amazing how Robert planted the seed. A couple of weeks later, I see this painting, and I realize, oh my God, this is it. Okay. If there's ever been any evidence of something that leaked out of the Hall of Records, this is it. Because it's astronomical knowledge that the Egyptians are known not to have known, yet there it is in their possession. And Graham, of course, Graham wrote the foreword for the book, and when he saw, the synopsis of my book, he immediately realized that this is a major plot point in the book, right? This is the main question I'm asking, besides under the Sphinx and all those things, is how did the Egyptians come into the possession of this knowledge of what looks like a heliocentric solar system, right? Because they thought the Earth is in the center and everything is revolving around the Earth. And here we have something that contradicts that. And so that's why this is an important painting. And just like you said, it's a big part of the book, and I go to great lengths to show the evidence that this is in fact an astronomical depiction. It's depicting what the universe basically is, how the universe is structured.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely extremely important. Yeah.
I agree.
I
Right.
think the same kind of information can be extracted from the Giza Plateau itself. All
Yes,
kinds of astronomical information is encoded there.
that's right.
Um,
That's one of Graham's big plot points, right? I mean, one of Graham's big messages. He's saying, we're not talking about a lost civilization that was building iPhones or skyscrapers. No, we're talking about a sophisticated prehistoric civilization that knew astronomy better than the people that followed that civilization. They knew writing, they knew architecture, they knew engineering methods, right? They knew how to cut stone in ways that we can't really reconstruct. But that doesn't mean that we're talking about a civilization like ours, like with computers and ChatGPT, right? And satellite SAR technology. No, we're not talking about that. But we're talking about a sophisticated civilization. And another part of that is shamanic wisdom,
yeah.
which is a big part of what Graham is, that's how Graham explains that civilization. And it's the shamans basically that left, probably they're the ones that recorded this knowledge and they archived this knowledge. And somehow that knowledge found its way into the next cycle of civilizations, the Sumerians, the Chinese, the Japanese, and the ancient Egyptians, right? And so this is what we're saying. There's some kind of civilization starter. And that starter is a seed that's composed of some recorded records or written records.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's actually segueing perfectly into what'll be part two here. And
Yeah.
in just a moment, I think we can take a little break and just record the next
Okay.
part two. But yeah, I mean, if you look as well to Edgar Casey's information, that's exactly what he said was like these people who
Hmm.
were immigrating from the island of Atlantis, they were bringing knowledge of the stars. That's what he said.
Right.
Was the biggest part was astronomical records they had.
Hmm.
And, if we had time to dive into what Dr. Thomas Brophy, the astrophysicist,
Right.
decoded from the Nabta circle,
That's
that
right.
mind-blowing stuff
Absolutely.
just
Yeah.
ends everything we thought we know.
Right.
The most advanced knowledge about all these different stars
Right.
that NASA doesn't even know today. They're showing
Right.
us with megaliths in a circle that must go like a stone circle that must go back. I mean, the last alignment of I think it was the head and shoulder stars of Orion hadn't happened since 16,500 BC, I believe.
Yeah.
This thing must be so old, and it shows
Yeah.
such
Yeah.
advanced knowledge. It's
Yeah, I mean, this was a big thing for Robert Bouval, right? Because Robert and
same
Graham
thing at Giza.
in 1998 or 1999 they came out with Message of the Sphinx, right? So they basically proposed that the Giza Plateau is a precessional clock that you are symbolically supposed to wind back to Zeb Tepe by realigning, right? The Sphinx looks at Leo, and the Orion Bell stars realign with the way that it happened 10,000 BC, right? And so then Robert asked himself, well, is there any evidence of processional knowledge before the ancient Egyptians? And sure enough, you go to Nabta, and that's where you have these complex these stone lines, right, that originate from these complex structures, and there are several of them, right? And there you go. There's actually evidence that they were tracking the position of certain stars. I believe it's Arcturus and Sirius, right? And then what you just said, or the Orion constellation in two different alignments inside of that stone circle, right? Yeah. So
Right,
there's a there,
specifically. Yeah.
yeah. So this is a right. So you have a model that was predicted certain discoveries, and then sure enough, you
Yeah.
see exactly that knowledge appearing in the middle of the desert.
Yeah. And not a random place either, at a point which was likely in ancient times, a certain age, exactly on the tropic as well, which is not
Yes,
an accident. But
that's
yeah,
right.
just to wrap that all up, I mean, if anyone wants to look into some of the stuff we're mentioning now, read the Origin Map by Dr. Thomas Brophy. That's a mind-blowing book with a
It
with an
is.
introduction and outro from Robert Schoch and John Anthony West himself. And then there was also Black Genesis, which was written by Bauval and Dr. Thomas Brophy. Um, and obviously, yes, by Manu Seyfzadeh's amazing book Under the Sphinx. And I'm going to be listing a bunch of the articles underneath in the description here that we've been talking about. But yeah, both of those theories, and then it also let's just throw in Gary Osborne and Scott Creighton wrote a book that's called The Giza Prophecy. And oh
Yes.
my God, anyone who still thinks
Yeah.
wasn't an intentional, as you said, it was Bavall, with Adrian Gilbert did the Orion mystery, which first announced this idea of the Orion correlation theory to the three pyramids. But yeah, Scott Creighton and Gary Osborne in that book, they go much further to show that it was
Mhm.
actually utilizing the satellite
Right.
pyramids as well. A processional clock that locked into Orion specifically showed the two extreme tilts of the processional cycle, meaning like these three pyramids are going to align today. That means these three over here are going to align 13,000 years from now,
Right. Exactly.
this
And
is
you know
same
what, Trevor?
exact thing as Nabta, both
You know what?
using Orion specifically.
I told Robert Bouval that in the pyramid text, there's actually an entry that talks about the rising and descending of Orion. There is a column, it's the penultimate column on the south wall of the burial chamber, where it says Orion in his season in the sky and Orion in his season at Earth, right? And which is exactly what Robert Bouval said, right? He said that if you want to look at precession on the ecliptic, you have to look at the precession of the equinox of the astrological signs, right? But when you look below the ecliptic, it's actually an up and down. It's a vertical excursion. That's where Orion hovers, right? And so you actually have a textual evidence that shows that there was knowledge of precession that came into the ancient Egyptians. Yeah. So there's so much evidence, right? I mean, we could be talking for hours,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Walter
Yeah.
Crittenden, The Lost Star of
Yeah.
Making Time,
I
John
really
Anthony
appreciate
West's
your
own
I
book.
really appreciate how well read you are, Trevor. This is unusual. I don't know too many people in alt history that have read all of this stuff. I really commend you for doing your homework like that. It's great.
Well, thank you. Obviously, you as well. But yeah, I mean, it's because, when I got started and I became friends with John, I had the absolute best guide I could have asked for.
Yeah.
to
Yes.
to cut me through all the other stuff that was like
Hmm.
not worth touching, and he sent me straight to all these books, so of course I paid attention.
Great.
And not that I've read them, but I have like 5,000 books at this point right now because not I'm not just that much of a hoarder, but I don't consider books material possessions anyway. They're ideological possessions, so it's different. But
Yeah.
I
Right.
became a bookseller at a certain point to justify my having 5,000 of them. But they're all in storage now. I want to get them back. But it is very important to me to make sure you're understanding what's already been said on these subjects. And as you say, we could obviously just go on for a week about all this stuff. But I think we've really done an awesome job covering a lot of the most important stuff from the under the Sphinx. And yeah, let's just wrap it up. Let me give it to you to just say last key points to take away from this body of evidence. What would you say?
I think that the evidence points to a falsification of the Khafre Sphinx theory, and that doesn't mean that we know when the original statue was made. It means that we need to keep searching. And if you ask me where to search, it would be under it's anomaly A. That's the best shot at getting new evidence to see if we can sort this out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree that you have 100% disproven that Coffer could have built it, that it was existing beforehand, that it was a lioness. I think that's essentially proven as well. And that it was resting on top of an ancient archive. And this idea of the Hall of Records was not just coming from Edgar Cayce. It was not
Mhm.
just myths and legends, which is that's why you're a hero to me, Manu, for the work you've contributed to this discussion. Most people know I got my start in this back 2006. I've been obsessed over this question because I've seen enough evidence that yes, the Hall of Records is something real. But it wasn't until you brought this book out that it got so real. It got so real with that. And it's like a weapon in the war of ideas. It's like I've got some power I can reference to now. And I really think you're one of the most just detail-oriented, evidence-based actual researchers who has the dedication that's required to drive you to actually get all the way to the end of these answers that have been so confused and muddled by speculation and people who are not really aware of all that's already been said. So,
Well, thanks. I appreciate your words, Trevor. And what makes me the happiest is that I was able to pass the torch on to people like you, right? You following, and I mean, myself, I've followed in the footsteps of others, and you're continuing the tradition. And that's really what matters. We want to, I hope that maybe that's one of the things we can hope for, that an interview like this will inspire other people to
yeah.
start researching. And when I was at Graham's conference a couple of weeks ago, that was such an inspiring part, was the audience. Like, there were young and old people sitting there, and some of those people came up to me and they are inspired to research ancient
Yeah.
mysteries, right? And that's the best thing you can hope for as a researcher, that somebody will, even if you're wrong about everything you're saying, but and that you somehow you lit a fire in someone else, and they can even prove you wrong, and that's okay, because that's what science is all about, right? So anyways, I wanted to thank you too for carrying on the tradition and for being so well read and for putting the time in and really getting to the bottom of it. So, you get an applause from me, Trevor.
Oh, thank you so much. I wasn't
Mm.
going to show this, but I do have the insignia where you say carry the torch and open the hole.
Carry the torch. That's
Definitely the
right.
coolest insignia I've ever
And
gotten on
and
a
you are, and you
floor.
are carrying the torch.
Yeah, at least just to make people care about it, because
Mm,
I think, like I'm saying, the dedication required to actually reach the end of these rabbit holes, you just do not get it unless you first see the implications and the importance. I see that.
yeah.
I think you see that,
Mm.
um, that this could absolutely fundamentally transform our world for the better.
I knew that you were into this when I saw you squeezing through a tiny hole under the,
Needed the
wherever.
evidence.
Yeah. And my hat off to you because I couldn't do that. I am claustrophobic. If I can't even crawl into the subterranean chamber. So when I saw, even just looking at this photo with you in that hole, I got nervous looking
Yeah.
at it. Yeah. So, my respect to you, Trevor.
Thank you so much. And yeah,
Yeah.
I so much respect you for this as well. It's like I really don't see any, you're the top of the top to me.
Well, thanks.
You're up there with these top other guys, but I think you've gone beyond them in some ways. And it's I see you as basically the closest thing I have today to a John Anthony West who I had before that I could, come to with questions. And every time I post something, it's like if I get something wrong, it's like I know you're going to be there to correct me. And it's such an amazing thing just to have you as a
It'll be you one day. It'll be you, Trevor. You be the one. It's a tradition, right? We're all torch carry bearers, and so we just pass on, right? A good discipline, a good philosophy of researching, right? We're all in this because we have pure intentions. We want to know more about the mysteries of nature. So, anyways. So now we're going to talk about So should we take a break, or do you want to just go
Yeah.
into Edfu?
Yeah, I think we can call this one wrapped up at this point, and then we'll just
Okay,
take a quick break and we'll record the next, and we'll make it a
sounds good.
separate episode, unless we will just
Okay.
want to make it a 5 hour long single episode in the end. But
No, I think we'll cut it off and then we'll continue. I think take a 5 minute break and then we'll be back.
yeah, sounds great. Awesome. Thank
Okay.
you so much,
Let me
Mike.
pause. Thank you. Mhm.
All right.